Chapter 871. This bird is really big. Looking at the big bird that was still fluttering on the ground, Zhao Zhan couldn't help but rub his hands and said with some surprise. Hearing Zhao Zhan's words, Jiang Hai also smiled, then walked to the front of the big bird and directly twisted the big bird's neck, then pulled out the arrow, wiped it, and threw it into his backpack. "Let me do it." Seeing that Jiang Hai was about to take the big bird, Zhao Zhan immediately came over to greet him. He wanted to help Jiang Hai carry the bird. Jiang Hai didn't mind, so he handed it over to Zhao Zhan. But as soon as Zhao Zhan touched the bird, Zhao Zhan was shocked. He saw Jiang Hai carrying the bird with one hand and thought that the bird was not heavy. Indeed, the bird's weight was quite deceiving. Because the feathers on the bird's body would expand, it looked very big, but in fact it was not that big after the feathers were removed. Another reason was that most bird bones were hollow, because this was conducive to flight, so a bird with a big skeleton may not be heavy. But unfortunately, Zhao Zhan didn't know what this bird was. When he held it, he couldn't help but be shocked. This is a wild turkey. It is already an adult. It seems to be 25 kilograms, about 50 kilograms. "Uncle, if you take it back, you probably won't be able to walk in the afternoon." Looking at his appearance, Jiang Hai also smiled and then took the bird back. Seeing Jiang Hai take out the wild turkey, Zhao Zhan couldn't help but smile awkwardly. But soon, he had the idea of taking a photo. He had seen this wild turkey after coming here, because many ranches and farms in Winthrop Town would raise this thing. Americans really like to eat wild turkey, just like how Northerners like to eat dumplings. As long as it was a new year, they would eat wild turkey here. They would eat it for Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, and New Year's. Well, in fact, they had nothing to eat except wild turkey, but it had to be said that wild turkey was really popular in the United States, but Huaxia people came to eat this thing for the novelty. Because Huaxia people were more accustomed to eating chickens from Huaxia. The meat of these chickens was more tender and more flavorful, and although wild turkey was thinner, it was also very hard and not very good for digestion. So Zhao Zhan and others had seen wild turkey before, but it was the first time they saw wild turkey. Wild turkey was like an enlarged version of a turkey. Generally, domesticated wild turkey could grow to 10 kilograms, which was about 20 kilograms. However, the wild turkey could grow up to 30 kilograms, and it could fly. Moreover, it was particularly fierce. Otherwise, these chickens would have been eaten by carnivores a long time ago. They couldn't run fast or fly high because of their granny appearance. The fighting power of an adult wild turkey was not inferior to that of a coyote, so this creature was really not easy to deal with. But when it came to humans, these guys couldn't do it. Jiang Hai carried the wild turkey and returned to the camp by the river. Zhao Zhan naturally went to show off the photos he had just taken to his old friends. This made the uncles quite unhappy. So before Jiang Hai cleaned up the turkey, they deliberately came over to take a picture with the turkey. They wanted to make up for it, right? After taking a picture, Jiang Hai cleaned up the wild turkey. At this time, the policeman also came back with 2 rabbits and a freshwater base. It seemed that he went downstream. After cleaning up the wild turkey, the rabbits, and the base in the small stream, there was no good cooking method here, only boiling and roasting. The 2 rabbits and turkey legs were roasted, the fish and chicken were boiled, and 2 pots of fish soup were made. The chicken inside was enough for everyone to eat. As they applied the seasonings they brought, the aroma of the meat began to hover in the campsite. Zhao Zhan and the others also had a big appetite. After a while, the meat was ready. They also had a good meal. After eating, they cleaned up the garbage here and buried the leftover bones in the soil. After a rest, Jiang Hai and the others continued to move forward. After crossing the stream, even Zhao Zhan and the others clearly felt that there were a lot more wild animals around, and they were not so afraid of people. From time to time, some birds on the branches would look at them. In the distance, some rabbits, wolves, and foxes would flash by. At first, everyone was very surprised. They had seen rabbits before, but wolves and foxes were wild, and not many people had seen them before. They were curious and scared. Although it was just a coyote, about the same size as a rural dog, it was a wolf after all. An uncle took a picture of Coyote, but he was proud of it for a long time. This was a pure wild one. However, before entering the mountain, Roga the cat had said that all the carnivores in the Appalachian Mountains were protected species, and they were not allowed to hunt. If anyone dared to hunt them, they would be kicked out of the team and sent back to Winthrop. Moreover, they would be sued. Therefore, they just looked around and sighed. The environmental protection in the United States was really good. As they walked, they looked around. It was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Just as the policeman in front was about to take them to set up camp, the policeman in front suddenly waved his hand, and everyone stopped. Then he motioned for everyone to walk slowly, looking at his movements. Although the uncles here did not know what was going on, they all bent down and walked slowly to the front. Not long after, they came in front of a patch of grass. Jiang Hai also looked into the distance. Sure enough, there was a herd of deer. When Jiang Hai looked over, Zhao Zhan and the other uncles also saw it. In an instant, they were trembling with excitement. Although they were going into the mountains to hunt, they couldn't say for sure if they would be able to hit it. However, they were able to touch it. This was also a good opportunity. This herd of deer was not small. Zhao Zhan and the other uncles also saw it. It was mainly made up of white-tailed deer, and there were also reindeer, moose, and elk. These deer might have been too comfortable at this time, so they did not notice that there was a group of people lying in the grass in the distance, aiming at them. There are about 60 deer in this herd, and 40 of them are adults. Our target is the adult deer. If we kill the youngest deer, we're not responsible for cutting off the head and transporting it, so it is useless to kill the youngest deer. Now let's divide the deer. Don't get mixed up later. Looking at the deer in front of them, the interpreter also translated the leading policeman's words. Hearing the policeman's words, although the uncles here were nervous, they slowly calmed down and waited for the distribution. Soon, each of the 20 people was given a deer. Of course, it was also according to their wishes. Some people wanted the white-tailed deer because its antlers were very beautiful, just like the Sika deer. It was the kind that was forked, the kind that had a big sharp fork. Some people wanted the reindeer, and some wanted the moose. The reindeer's antlers were also forked, but much wider, like a large piece of coral. The moose's antlers were a large piece of root, and then there were sharp thorns on the top. It could be said that they were quite unique, but no matter what kind of antlers it was very difficult to find them in China. Here, they were lucky. The 20 people here divided the deer. Jiang Hai and the policeman naturally had no interest in these things. With the policeman's order, they fired. The 20 people also pulled the trigger, but unfortunately, they had only practiced for 3 days, or to be exact, 2 days. This level of accuracy was still quite unreliable. When the gunshot sounded, the deer over there were not stupid. When they heard the first sound, they directly jumped up and then fled in all directions. Seeing these deer flee, the people here did not care so much. They picked up their guns and began to shoot, but unfortunately, it was almost impossible to hit the running deer, especially people like them who had not touched guns much. After 5 bullets were used up, they changed the magazine again. By the time they ran out of bullets, the deer had already run away. There were many deer that were shot, but basically, there were no fatal injuries. If they were not shot in the butt, they were shot in the back. These deer bounced away. Although these places hurt, they were not careless because these deer had already developed antibodies in their bodies. They would be fine after resting in the forest for a period of time. As for the more than 60 deer, only 3 of them were left behind. Yes, the 20 people fired at least 300 bullets, but only 3 deer were hit. It had to be admitted that this was a little embarrassing, especially those who were holding rifles. Of the 3 deer, only 1 was hit by a rifle. The other 2 were hit by a shotgun. There was no other way. The deer were shot in a large area, and the rifle was only an eye. It was difficult to hit these deer. According to the previous allocation, the police still remembered who shot which deer. They had already said that the deer that were allocated were their own. After the shooting, no matter if the deer was shot by a person or not, the deer would be his. This also put an end to the possibility of stealing the deer. Looking at the owners of the 3 deer that had been marked and celebrating loudly, the people who didn't manage to hit the deer couldn't help but sigh helplessly. This opportunity had been placed in front of them, but they didn't grasp it. Who could be blamed for that? Looking at the police over there, They went over and bled the deer. Then they sealed the things in the deer head first. When they returned, they would be specially made into specimens. It was not that there were no deer head specimens in the country, but they were all made of deer skin, bones, and stuffing. They were not real deer heads, but this thing was made of a real deer head. The 3 people over there were so excited that they did not know what to say. Looking at the 3 people over there, the other 17 uncles felt quite uncomfortable. It was a pity that they did not shoot the deer. Chapter 872. Little Jiang, do you think we still have a chance to hit a deer? At night, in the predetermined road camp, simple tents had been set up, and the guns of these uncles had been put away. A few bonfires were burning, and a fragrant venison soup was stewing on top of them. However, the atmosphere in the camp was at 2 extremes. One side was very high, while the other side was somewhat depressed. There is a chance. After we get up tomorrow, we will stay in this area until noon. There should be a chance to hit a deer. If we don't hit one by noon, then you can only blame it on your bad luck. Hearing Uncle Zhao Zhan's words, Jiang Hai smiled. He removed the root of a mushroom, cut it into several pieces, and then threw it into the soup pot. Don't think that Jiang Hai threw in an ordinary mushroom. This thing was actually a very expensive fungus. Its scientific name was Boletus. This thing was not cheap outside, especially this thing was wild. In addition to Boletus, there were also Hericium arenaceus, Matsutake, and so on. It could be said that along the way, Jiang Hai had picked a lot of delicious food. Smelling the venison soup in front of him, Jiang Hai had a little appetite. Unfortunately, the people around him sighed. In fact, it was understandable that these people did not hit a deer. After walking for a day, Jiang Hai and the others encountered a large herd of deer. There were about 60 of them. 20 people shot at 60 deer. But the result was that only 3 were hit. Seeing this result, Jiang Hai laughed. If they had not practiced for 3 days, they might not have even hit 3. But no matter who hit them, these 3 deer had their own masters. The police went up and cut off the deer's head, and then sealed it. After cutting off about 30 pounds of meat from the deer, they threw the deer's body into the distant forest. They were not afraid that any carnivores would smell the blood and find them, because they had enough weapons. At the critical moment, although these people could not shoot accurately, there were still 20 guns. Even if they encountered a wolf pack made up of hundreds of wolves, they could still escape with 99% of their lives. Human beings were the most destructive existence in this world. Moreover, there were no wolf packs in this mountain now. At most, there were some coyotes, foxes, and the like, which posed no threat to them. After cutting the venison, they rushed to their own campsite. They arrived at the campsite around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, pitched their tents, fetched water, lit a fire, and cooked the venison. After a series of things, it was already night before they knew it. However, being in the forest was different from being outside. Here, the moon couldn't be seen. Everyone was sitting around the 4 bonfires, waiting for Jiang Hai to finish cooking. Zhao Zhan and the other uncles who had a good relationship with Jiang Hai came to Jiang Hai's side. The other 3 bonfires had people who had hunted deer and were bragging about it. Only Zhao Zhan's side didn't hunt anything. Sigh, it's really F*** up this time. I clearly had a chance. I saw my bullet hit that guy's ass, but that guy was fine. Damn it. Hearing Jiang Hai say that there really was a chance, Zhao Zhan couldn't help but blame himself. Before they hunted, they always thought that hunting was actually very simple. Look at the prey, raise your hand, and shoot. After all, this was how it was played in TV dramas and movies. But obviously, this was not an easy thing. They were deceived. Animals were not stupid. Basically, even if it was an old hunter, if the first shot didn't hit the prey's vital point, then the possibility of catching the prey was very small. This was also why hunting had to be done with shotguns. The range of the shot was like a deer bullet. Maybe one shot would hit the prey's vital point, and then the prey would be left behind. Of course, the place where the prey was shot had to be dug out and thrown away because it was full of small steel balls. The meat there was already rotten, and there was no way to eat it. If I had known, I would have chosen a shotgun. Hearing Zhao Zhan's words, an uncle next to him sighed and said, If I don't hit it, I will sign up again after I go out." Hearing his words, another uncle next to him said seriously. Hearing his words, two other uncles couldn't help but agree, but more uncles sighed. They only came here to play for a week or half a month. These 5 days were almost wasted. If they came here for another 5 days, they wouldn't have enough time. If they wanted to hunt again, they would have to wait until the next time. But the question was, when would the next time be? You can't sign up after you go out. You have been in the mountains, and your physical strength has been overdrawn. It's just that you haven't recovered yet. After you go home, you have to lie down for a few days. It's impossible to sign up without at least a week's effort. Also, you may not have such an opportunity every year in the future. The autumn hunt is only held in autumn. As long as it snows, you can't enter the mountains. Spring is the time when everything recovers, and Americans don't hunt at this time. It's the same in summer, when the cubs haven't been born yet. Next year, you won't have the chance to see them again. Although this may be said to discourage these uncles, after thinking about it, Jiang Hai decided to tell the truth. Hearing that there may be no chance to go into the mountains in the future, Jiang Hai felt the pressure around him drop a little. Sigh. With a sigh, these uncles stopped talking. After dinner, they went to sleep. Jiang Hai and Belle also went to sleep. Naturally, the 3 policemen were on night watch. Jiang Hai was only there to help. It was a quiet night. Of course, from time to time, there were wolf howls. It was not clear if it would cause insomnia, but from the snoring in Jiang Hai's ears, it was estimated that very few people would suffer from insomnia. After walking for a whole day, these people were tired. At 6 o'clock the next morning, when a morning light shone through the gaps between the leaves and shone on the open space, Jiang Hai and the others had already gotten up. After washing their faces and brushing their teeth, the other uncles also got up one after another. Today, they could split into 4 groups and search around. This was also their last chance to hunt deer. After a simple breakfast, Jiang Hai and Belle led Zhao Zhan and the other 4 old men into the distant forest. Jiang Hai walked in front and Belle walked behind. The 5 uncles held their guns and kept shooting at the situation around them. Perhaps it was because their determination to hunt deer moved the heavens. After walking for about half an hour, Jiang Hai raised his hand and motioned for everyone to stop. He heard the sound of a large group of animals moving. Seeing Jiang Hai motioning for everyone to stop, Zhao Zhan and the others also stopped. Then, they stared at Jiang Hai without blinking. Jiang Hai quietly walked to the front. Then, under the cover of a big tree, he pulled open the grass and looked into the distance. He had to admit that their movements were really good. In the grass in the distance, there was a herd of deer. Just like what the state government said, the deer herds in the Appalachian Mountains were becoming a disaster. This place was not far from their campsite last night, but there was a herd of deer here. It had to be said that they were not timid. Jiang Hai glanced at it. It was still the same mixed herd of deer as yesterday, but there were fewer deer. There were only about 20 adult deer and a dozen young deer. Jiang Hai waved to Zhao Zhan and the others behind him. These people were also excited and slowly walked over with their waists bent. After pulling open the grass, Zhao Zhan and the others were excited. If they still thought that hunting was so simple yesterday, then they were much more careful now. Their hands holding the guns were slightly trembling. When aiming, aim at the neck. These rifles of yours, other than the neck, lungs, and heart, there are no fatal wounds. You can't see the lungs and heart. Don't think about hitting the legs. If you hit the thighs, they will be fine. If you hit the calves, you won't be able to hit them. When deer were eating grass, their legs were also moving. Because they had finished eating the grass, they had to move to eat another piece of grass. Naturally, they had to move. However, these people who had only practiced for 3 days wanted to hit the deer's legs from about 50 meters away. Haha, it was actually a joke. Their necks might not even be accurate. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, Zhao Zhan and the others nodded. Then they half-knelt on the ground, picked up their guns, and carefully aimed. After Jiang Hai finished distributing the deer to them, he saw that everyone was motioning for them to aim. Jiang Hai also ordered, "Bang, bang, 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 bang. Bang, 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 bang." A series of 5 gunshots rang out. At the moment of the first gunshot, the deer had already scattered in all directions. Zhao Zhan and the others continued to fire bullets. After emptying a magazine of 5 bullets, Jiang Hai helplessly discovered that not a single deer had been shot. Zhao Zhan and the others were quite helpless. What the hell is this? Zhao Zhan was quite helpless. The next time they went into the mountains, they would not use a rifle, even if they were beaten to death. Who said that this thing was powerful? How could it be better than a hunting rifle? There's no other way this time. Seeing that these people still didn't seize the opportunity, Jiang Hai sighed helplessly. Guns weren't meant to be used like this. These people used guns directly on their shoulders and then aimed at the other person's neck. Didn't they consider the problem of recoil? The recoil of a real rifle was not as simple as in the game. It required a lot of force to control the gun and shoot in advance. Well, they did not understand this. This time, it was inevitable that they would play in vain. Now, it was also telling them that it was not that they could not hit the deer, but that they did not have the ability to do so. Who could they blame? Chapter 873. At noon, after having a helpless meal, Jiang Hai and the others left the deep mountains and forests. Jiang Hai and his team were quite lucky. At least they encountered another herd of deer. Only one of the other 4 teams encountered a herd of deer, but it was only a herd of deer. There were less than 10 deer in total, and all of them were white-tailed deer. However, they also wanted the white-tailed deer, but the problem was that white-tailed deer were the most difficult to hit. That was because this type of deer was petite, could jump high, run fast, and had a very sensitive sense of danger. Under such circumstances, even some experienced hunters would have a 90% chance of hitting this type of deer, let alone these newbies. Therefore, they fired a lot of bullets, but it was useless. On the way back, Zhao Zhan and the other uncles fired a shot from time to time. This was to vent their frustrations. They were also burning guns. Weren't they going into the mountains to shoot bullets? Although it was more expensive than shooting at the shooting range, they didn't care. The gunshots echoed in the forest. Unknowingly, they had also returned to the outskirts of the mountains. At around 3:00 in the afternoon, they returned to Winthrop in their respective cars. At the same time, the other 12 teams also returned. This time, every team had a deer head, more or less. The extra team was made up of 20 people between the ages of 20 and 35. They had a total of 8 deer heads. These 20 people were enthusiasts of a military forum in China. They came to Winthrop to play with guns. Their scores in the shooting range were also quite high. For uncles like Zhao Zhan and the other uncles, they only needed to hit the target. It was good enough if they could hit the target and hit the 7th ring. However, these people were aiming for the 8th ring, the 9th ring, or even the 10th ring. They also had a good understanding of the gun's recoil. Even so, an actual battle was an actual battle. At the same time, they also encountered 3 waves of deer. It had to be said that strength and luck coexisted. But there were also some teams that were more miserable. Some only managed to hit 1, while others only managed to hit 2. Jiang Hai's team only managed to hit 3, yet they were still ranked 5th from the bottom. One had to admit that these newcomers were really far behind. After they returned, Jiang Hai also had a meeting with the leaders of each team. At the same time, the other police officers also brought the owners of the deer heads to the Native American store. There, the Native American would use the native method to make deer heads into specimens. They could choose to look at them. If they couldn't stand it, they could come back later to collect it. Or they could leave a domestic address and send it back. Of course, it was all authentic. Regardless of how these people distributed the deer heads, Jiang Hai and the other team leaders also discussed what to do after entering the mountains. It had to be admitted that most people in Huaxia followed the local order, contracts, and regulations. However, there were always some people who thought they were different. Of course, there were more people like this in the United States, but there were also people in Huaxia. Not everyone had the same moderate character. For example, in Jiang Hai's team, if it wasn't for Jiang Hai watching over them, even a few uncles would have gone into the forest to smoke. In the forest, especially in the late autumn forest, smoking was the most important thing. However, the other teams more or less had some problems. That enthusiast team was the only one that didn't have any problems. The other teams all had problems. Some teams had people who left the team to take photos, some wanted to smoke, and some fired randomly after entering the mountains, etc. These embarrassing situations were all recorded. It wasn't until that night, when they put away the guns that they were about to go to bed, that the interpreter showed them these videos and told them that they would have to pay for these videos. Only then did they remember that there was still a deposit. Some people immediately said that they want to change it, but it was useless. They had already recorded it. Seeing that they couldn't get their money back, some people went crazy on the spot. However, it was useless. They were deep in the mountains. If they had the guts, they would leave on their own. They didn't have the guts to fight with these police officers. That was a joke. In the United States, if you dared to fight with the police could shoot you to death. Although these tourists were Huaxia, this was the United States, so they had to abide by the laws of the United States. Although there were no incidents of tourists being shot dead in Winthrop, there were some drunkards who caused trouble and were shot in the hands and feet by the police. These incidents also frightened these tourists. Therefore, when some of them came back, they were obviously not happy and were cursing. Jiang Hai could only laugh at these people. He couldn't do anything about it. This was also the reason why he didn't open up his ranch. You couldn't expect all tourists to be saints. There would always be some bastards. If it wasn't for the development of Winthrop, Jiang Hai wouldn't even want to start a tourism industry. If he didn't have 300 million, but 3 billion, he might have really gone to Australia, New Zealand, or Hawaii to buy an island. However, there was also a very important problem. If he were to buy an island, the safety issue would be the biggest problem in the initial stage. Deduct the money where it should be deducted, and ignore the people who should be ignored. We'll do everything according to the contract they signed. Although there are some minor issues, overall, it's still very successful. Tomorrow, we'll start the second round of recruitment. I won't be coming then, but when you're training, you must strengthen the education in these aspects. Jiang Hai said seriously as he looked at the people in front of him, as well as Roga Decatur. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, this trip into the mountains could be considered to have come to a successful end. After everything was arranged, Jiang Hai also returned to his manor. After returning home, Jiang Hai naturally took a good shower and then ate a delicious dinner made by Chia. Then, he hugged his beautiful wife and concubines and went to sleep. He was too lazy to care about such a heavenly life. It was a quiet night. The next morning, the hunting news spread to the tourists in Winthrop. It instantly caused an explosive effect. Half of those who didn't go and those who were watching went to sign up early in the morning. They didn't care about the small amount of money. What they cared about was the honor of being able to hunt a deer. Of course, most people didn't manage to hunt a deer, so they were elegantly ignored. This was because they heard from those who didn't manage to hunt a deer that there were plenty of deer in the mountains. Therefore, in their opinion, they would definitely be able to hunt one. People were like this. They always had their own foresight. In layman's terms, it was easy to think positively. No matter what others did, as long as they did it themselves, they would definitely succeed, especially when there were people around them who had succeeded. Therefore, on the second day of these people's return, there were as many as 730 people who signed up for the training in the town. However, some of them couldn't be accepted because many of them had just entered the mountains but didn't manage to hunt anything. They were unwilling to give up, so they came again and wanted to enter the mountains again. However, these people were all persuaded to go back because they had just entered the mountains and needed a rest. If they wanted to join the training, they could only do it the next time they signed up. Excluding these people, there were about 500 people who signed up. There were young people, middle-aged people, and uncles in their 50s. Mayor Wallace was very happy to see the situation in front of him. At the same time, the other instructors he had prepared in advance were also in place. The second batch of training began. At the same time, they also distributed the rules of deducting money. After entering the mountains, they would be deducted $100 each time. After smoking in the mountains, they would be deducted $1,000 each time. At the same time, before entering the mountains, they would be searched for cigarettes. Cigarettes were absolutely not allowed to be brought up the mountain. After entering the mountains, if they didn't listen to orders, casually talk back to the instructors, or even dare to fight, they would be deducted $2,000 and sent back to town. These rules were very strict, so there probably wouldn't be too many people who would commit crimes in the second batch. However, this had nothing to do with Jiang Hai, because he wouldn't be following the second batch. At this time, he had returned to his original state at home. To be honest, Jiang Hai really liked to laze around at home when he had nothing to do. What could be more comfortable than this? No matter what other people thought, Jiang Hai was living like this, and he was very happy. Unknowingly, the days slowly passed. Suddenly, when Jiang Hai woke up one morning, he found that the grass in his field was covered with a layer of frost. Looking at the layer of frost, Jiang Hai knew that winter was coming. At this time, Robbins Garcia and the others were working hard to harvest the grass. Some of the grass was for Du Feynman, some for Luke Sean, and some for themselves. All of this had to be done before it snowed. Although Jiang Hai wasn't very smart, this was his home after all, so he had been helping out these few days. Last year, when there were only 5 cowboys, Jiang Hai and the others were already very busy. Now that there were 8 cowboys, Jiang Hai and the others naturally became faster and faster, trying their best to harvest as much grass as possible. Under such circumstances, Winthrop's first snow slowly drifted down along with the Siberian cold air. When it snowed, there were some who were happy and some who were sad. Those who liked it were mainly tourists who were heading south, because they rarely saw such heavy snow. Perhaps because Winthrop's environmental protection was good, the snowflakes were white and big, somewhat similar to the snow in Ice City when Jiang Hai was young. Now, the snow in Ice City was basically gray, and the environmental pollution was too serious. Those who were sad were naturally the tourists who wanted to go into the mountains to hunt, because they knew that the instructor had always said that as long as it snowed, this project would be over. This was because the snow would seal the mountains, and it was not a joke. Chapter 874. Jiang Hai, do you want to eat biscuits? I just made them. Chia smiled and called out to Jiang Hai, who was sitting by the window on the first floor and looking at the heavy snow outside. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also said okay, then jumped down from the windowsill and walked quickly to the restaurant on the first floor. At the same time, other people also heard the news and ran over. For most people, the uniformity was something that made people feel helpless, especially those who once dreamed of walking around the world with a sword and seeing the prosperity of the world. But in the end, they worked from 9 to 5, and their wives, children, and parents were always there. For most people in the city, every day was the same. Get up in the morning, have breakfast, then go to work, no matter what work you do. Rest at noon, go to work in the afternoon, work again, and go home the evening, or go out to play first or work overtime, and then go home. People like Jiang Hai and others basically had a family and started a career. They went home to sleep, and the next day repeated the previous day. From Monday to Friday, it was the same. It was difficult to have passion on Saturday and Sunday. At most, they would go home to see their parents and sleep in for a while. The weekend would be over, and then a new round of life would hit them again. This was the reality. For most people, such a life made them numb. There was also a small number of people who did not consider their parents, children, and significant others. They felt that such a life was killing them. Then they wanted to go out, they wanted to see the outside world. They wanted to learn the deeds of some people who became popular on the internet, quit their jobs, and go out for a walk. As a result, after a walk, 99% of people would find that they had wasted a long time, and most importantly, they had to start from the beginning. In fact, it was plain. This was the real life. Life was about being born and living on. This was not some chicken soup. It could be said that this was a cup of poison. It was not so easy to use a cheat. Those who had to accept their fate had to accept it. For example, Jiang Hai. If he got this golden finger 10 years ago, he probably would not be him anymore. Jiang Hai had also thought about what would have happened if he had obtained the Dragon Balls earlier. It was just that simple. It was most likely that he would first encircle a piece of land in the country, and then rely on spiritual energy to make his first bucket of gold. Then, he would be discovered by some upper-class forces, and he would fight with them. In the end, the state machinery would appear and annex the land, but he would obtain some domestic status. He would either help the country stand proudly at the top of the world, or he would be directly dissected for research, contributing to the evolution of mankind. But no matter what the reason was, it was definitely not as good as now. Some people also said that Jiang Hai went abroad after he became rich. This was unpatriotic and had no positive energy. Regarding this, Jiang Hai could only laugh. Everyone pursues different things. Naturally, their approach is also different. Jiang Hai had given up a long time ago. Perhaps it was when his mother passed away. He didn't have any ambitions. Naturally, he didn't have any thoughts of saving the world. He didn't have the desire to help the country unify the world. His only thought was to live well. He was living now, not to let others see that he was living a good life, but simply to enjoy life. It was said that society was the best place to train a person. After entering society, this person might become tactful, or he might not be able to adapt to society. After bumping his head and bleeding, he would become tactful again. However, there were some people, such as Jiang Hai, who had already entered the early stage of retirement. They entered the mentality of retirement in advance. Yes, Jiang Hai was now in the mentality of retirement. No matter how good the scenery was, one would get tired of it after seeing it too much. However, Jiang Hai wouldn't. He felt that his current life was really comfortable. He did the same thing every day. He didn't have to worry about money. He ate delicious food every day, and there were countless beautiful women around him. No matter why they came to him in the first place, at least they didn't have any utilitarian thoughts at the moment. Was this enough? Wasn't it? He didn't ask for more ideas. He thought that this was already very good. In the eyes of some ambitious people, Jiang Hai was just mud that couldn't be supported by a wall. With such a high-level ability, he naturally had to seek a higher status. Ambition. This word was sometimes very important. But unfortunately, Jiang Hai didn't have it. He now understood some of Liu Shan's thoughts. Here, he didn't have to worry about anything. Here, he could enjoy beautiful wives and concubines. Here, he could do whatever he wanted all day long. Why would he think about things like restoring the country? There was no need at all, because this was similar to when he was the emperor, wasn't it? Now, Jiang Hai had some such thoughts, so others might get tired of it, but he wouldn't. Have you finished your homework? Walking to the dining table, Jiang Hai picked up a cookie that Chia had just baked. As he spoke, he said to Tarak, who also picked up a cookie. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Tarak raised his head proudly. Of course, Jiang Hai had to admit that Tarak might be a genius in learning. So far, she didn't have any normal contact with learning for a long time. After 2 months of school, 2 months of preschool, and 4 months, she had already learned the basic curriculum of high school. Jiang Hai had to admit that the United States didn't have much in terms of applied education. Although Jiang Hai was a bad student, he still remembered what he learned when he was in school. Now that Tarak was in his first year of high school, the things he learned were basically what he learned in the second year of junior high school. The education in the United States was still somewhat different from that in China. There were many school systems in the United States, such as 633, 8-4, 6-6, 4-4-4, 5-3-4, and so on. But primary school, junior high school, and high school were all compulsory education. Of course, you had to listen to the allocation and go to a school near you. If you want to choose those private aristocratic schools, naturally it was different. But basically, in the United States, except for those who often moved, the more stable people would hardly change school for their children. Because every school system was different, it wasn't easy for children to integrate back into the school. It was the same in Winthrop. Basically, starting school here was the 6th grade of the town's primary school, the 3rd grade of the town's junior high school, and the 3rd grade of the town's high school. Although these 3 schools were not in the same place, the effect was the same. Of course, this was the most common 6-3-3 school. But to be honest, the education here didn't require much memorization. That was why Tarak could learn so quickly. But there were quite a lot of things that required independent thinking and didn't have the correct answer. For example, in the 5th grade here, they had to write papers to discuss whether the United States should participate in World War II, discuss the Civil War, and discuss certain battles. For these things, Jiang Hai felt that the United States should participate in the war. For example, for the first point, if Jiang Hai felt that the United States should participate in the war, why? It was definitely not to improve the international status of the United States. It must be to fight against evil and save the people of the world. It was absolutely righteous and full of positive energy. This was the only answer. But in the United States, there were probably quite a few people who wrote this. The mainstream agreed that the United States should participate in the war to improve the international status of the United States, or to increase the national pride, or to meet the needs of the global development of business and culture. They could also write that they didn't participate in the war and were conservative. In this regard, Jiang Hai could only chuckle. Jiang Hai looked at the learning level of the 6th grade children here. Even the 3rd grade children in the country could sweep them clean. The level of the 6th grade children in the country here was not a problem for the 2nd grade children. Tarak's homework is under my watch. Why are you still worried? You must know that Chi Jia is a true genius. When she heard Jiang Hai's words, Chia came out with another plate of cookies and said with a smile. Jiang Hai liked to eat cookies very much. This was probably his favorite type of cookie. There was no other cookie. The first time he ate this was when he was in the 3rd grade of primary school. At that time, his family still lived in a bungalow. There was a cake shop next to it. Of course, they didn't only sell birthday cakes. They also made some small pastries to eat. It was also the first time he ate cookies. At that time, he had never eaten anything with such a strong milk flavor. At that time, he didn't even eat fresh milk cake. He only ate cream cake, the kind that was very hard to eat. He even thought that such a small piece of cookie would require a bag of milk to make. However, he realized that he was quite naive at that time. But to be honest, the cookies and meat floss rolls at that time were really delicious. When he saw other children eating these things, it would be a lie to say that he didn't crave them. At that time, he really did crave them. But now, he could eat whatever he wanted. He had the ability to do so. I know, I'm just asking. Picking up a few more cookies, Jiang Hai smiled and threw the cookies into his mouth. For a while, the chewing crumbs flew everywhere, but everyone didn't care. Just as the villa was filled with joy, suddenly, the door of Jiang Hai's villa opened, and then Galena, wearing a mink fur, walked in from the outside. These mink furs were naturally bought by Jiang Hai. F***CK artificial furs. Jiang Hai buys animal furs. He supports protecting the environment. He doesn't rely on those animals to make money. But these mink furs are all farmed. If you don't buy these minks, what about those farmers? So those people from the Animal Protection Association are like dog fans. They all stand on the moral high ground of human nature and ask others to do what they want. Jiang Hai will be a ghost to care about them. Let these guys sh*t. He wants to buy, who can stop him? Boss, there is news from California. After shaking off the snow on her body, Galena came over with a document. Chapter 875. Hearing Jia Lena's words, Jiang Hai froze for a moment. Then he solemnly picked up the document in Jia Lena's hand and walked away. Of course, he also had a stack of cookies in his hand. He ate them while reading the document in front of him. Since he went to Ulan with Azalina to rescue these girls had been protecting Jiang Hai and his career. Although it was a bit shameful to let these girls protect his safety and career, and some male chauvinistic people might not be able to stand it, Jiang Hai felt at ease because this was the meaning of their existence. In addition to protecting Jiang Hai's property and the safety of others, these girls had received 3 orders from Jiang Hai. First, to hunt down Christinatus' family. This was 95% completed, but unfortunately, it was a failure. Second, to find the exact location of the map that Tarak brought to Jiang Hai when he came out of the forest. Although Jiang Hai had a lot of money, it did not mean that he would not take advantage of it, right? Third, which was also Jiang Hai's biggest worry, he was looking for the mark. Jiang Hai was quite satisfied with the progress of the last 2 tasks. It didn't take long for these girls to confirm that these 2 locations were in California, so Jiang Hai put more focus and attention on this land. Today, these 2 things appeared. The map that Taraga gave to Jiang Hai had confirmed the specific location. In fact, it was not very clear that this was California. To be precise, it should be the junction of California and Nevada, the junction of the Sierra Nevada, the Cordillera Mountains, and Yosemite National Park. Of course, this place was not small. It was impossible to find it without actually seeing it. Wallace Shelley had used a drone to look for it, and Laylis Carter had also looked for it personally, but they did not find it. They could only confirm that the underground mine was probably there. As for Bruce David's situation, it was a bit complicated because the report said that this guy was crazy. Crazy? Looking at the record, Jiang Hai asked with some doubts. Of course, his purpose was not so pure. At the same time, when the girls drank too much, he would tattoo them or do some disgusting things to leave his own mark. But what people didn't expect was that his mental illness worsened last year. Someone found him eating a person, so he was arrested and sent to the police station. After the police determined that he was mentally ill, they locked him up in a prison on the outskirts of Marysville on the other side of Yuba. Looking at Jiang Hai, Jalina thought for a moment and decided to tell the truth. Eating people. He is mentally ill. Jiang Hai already had a feeling when he heard the female bartender say that, but he didn't think that this guy would eat people. An inexplicable piece of music echoed in his mind. Please tell me, what is that structure? What else exists in my body? Thinking of this, he looked at the cookie in his hand and felt like he couldn't eat it. I'm thinking too much, but since their existence has been confirmed, we have to confirm it. Shaking his head, Jiang Hai threw the slight discomfort out of his mind, and then began to think about the problem of going to California this time. Now that these two destinations have been found, he has to find a way to solve them. There will probably be some trouble in the mountains, because he didn't know if he would encounter any danger in the mountains. There are a lot of things that need to be prepared, and most importantly, even the professional Lei Lizzie couldn't find the place. Jiang Hai reckoned that it would be a waste of time if he went there himself. However, he had other ideas. Looking at Xiao Bai and Xiao Huang in the distance, he reckoned that with them, the chances of finding the place would be higher. As for that mentally ill person, he would think about it when he went there. Then who will go this time? Looking at Jiang Hai, Jalina asked hesitantly. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai thought about it for a moment. This time, there must be a lot of people, but there must not be too few. The safety of his own manor, the company, and Hua Xia had to be taken into consideration, so Du Ning definitely couldn't go. Belle Lester alone was enough to make Jiang Hai feel uneasy. After thinking for a while, he roughly decided on a few people. Either Azalina or Jalina would go and command the others this time. Huali Shelley was the web spider, and she was also an intelligence agent this time, so she definitely had to go. Zhang Yijin's side couldn't be short of people, so he left Valentina there. This time, the ones going would be himself, Xiao Bai, Xiao Huang, Azalina, Jalina, Biriak, Aleppo, and Liz Carter. 5 people and 2 dogs, that would be enough. I'll stay at home. Although I'm also an alpha, Azalina is much stronger than me. She won't have any problems commanding Valentina and Aleppo. Jalina seemed to have noticed Jiang Hai's hesitation, so she took the initiative to speak. Hearing Jalina's words, Jiang Hai also nodded. Indeed, although the Alpha's teams were numbered, in terms of politics, they were at the same level. Why should Jalina command him when Jalina was a 1-to-1? These women weren't easy to deal with, so it was better to let Azalina command them. Okay, in that case, it's settled. We'll set off as soon as possible. After thinking for a while, Jiang Hai nodded to Jalina and said seriously. But just as he finished speaking, Jiang Hai's shoulder was tapped. You're going out again? But it's almost Christmas. After being tapped, Jiang Hai also turned his head to look at the person who tapped him. It was none other than Qi Jie. At this time, Qi Jie looked at Jiang Hai with the word unhappy written clearly on her face. Indeed, Jiang Hai has gone to South Korea and Huaxian not long ago. After coming back, he didn't even stay for 3 weeks, and now he had to leave again. And it seemed that he didn't know when he would come back this time. I have something to do. Besides, there's still more than a month before Christmas. Also, we don't celebrate Christmas. Looking at Qi Jie behind him, Jiang Hai chuckled. These girls around Jiang Hai were very entangled with Jiang Hai, and the most active one was Qi Jie. Now, she was also acting like a little boss here. The only one who could resist her was AI Xiaoxi. But after all, AI Xiaoxi was a girl who didn't even finish college. How could she be the opponent of this senior scholar? So now, at most, she only had some right to speak occasionally. You also know that there's only 1 month left. After Christmas, it will be the new year. After the new year, it will be the new year. You don't know that I've been very busy recently. No matter what, you're not allowed to go this time. If you must go, unless you bring me. Looking at Jiang Hai, Qi Jie put her hand on Jiang Hai's and then said to Jiang Hai. But when she said 4/5 of the words, there was a sudden turn at the end. She said to Jiang Hai with a serious face, "Ugh, I'll bring you." I'm not going to play. Why should I bring you? Hearing Qi Jie's words, Jiang Hai smiled bitterly. This time, he was going to investigate the badge and the mine. If there was no accident, if he found the mine, then he would go down the mine. No one knew what dangers would happen there. If he brought Qi Jie, she would be more or less a burden. It would be troublesome. So to be honest, Jiang Hai didn't want to bring her. What? Am I useless? I'm a doctor. If you're bitten by a snake in the wild, stung by an insect, have a headache, or have a fever, I will definitely be more secure by your side. At least I can save your life. Looking at Jiang Hai's eyes, Qi Jie raised her head and said with a serious face. Speaking of which, if she didn't mention it, Jiang Hai would have forgotten that she was a doctor and not a teacher. Although she was not an emergency doctor, nor was she a doctor of internal medicine or surgery, she seemed to understand these things. Just like what she said, at least if they met with any trouble in the wild with her around, they would be able to save their lives. The most important thing was that Jiang Hai trusted her now. He didn't care about showing some of his differences in front of her. Of course, the real life-saving thing was the Dragon Ball. Jiang Hai couldn't tell anyone about it. This had nothing to do with trust or not. If this secret was told to others, it would also harm others. Jiang Hai was prepared to take it with him for a lifetime. Well, then you should also prepare. We may be leaving soon. After thinking about it, Jiang Hai looked at Qi Jie in front of him and said seriously. Hearing that Jiang Hai finally agreed to take her, Qi Jie also clenched her fists and then left happily. Are you really going to take her? You know, the place where we go back may not be so safe. Looking at Jiang Hai in front of her, Zhao Lina said seriously. They were going to explore treasures, not to play. Is it really good to take Qi Jie, a person who has no fighting power? But hearing her words, Jiang Hai nodded affirmatively. She is right. It is very important to have a doctor in the team. As for her skills, I will teach her more in the next 2 days. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai also sighed. He could only seize the next few days and practice more. At least teach her how to protect herself and how to shoot. Chapter 876. After getting off the plane, Qi Jie looked at the sun hanging high in the sky and couldn't help but chuckle. Phew, the weather here is really different from Winthrop. It's so comfortable, but the sun is a little too hot. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also chuckled, then squatted down and tied a rope around the necks of Goldie and Xiao Bai. In fact, this rope was just for show. With Goldie and Xiao Bai's current strength, they could break it if they struggled, let alone bite it off. They could even take the person who was pulling them away by force. The reason why Jiang Hai tied this rope was mainly because he wanted to give others the impression that these two monsters were being restrained by someone. Boss, Biliak has already prepared a place to stay. We still need to buy guns and the like, but these things aren't difficult to get here. Looking at Jiang Hai, Azalina slowly walked to Jiang Hai's side with her strong legs and said to him with a smile. Although Jiang Hai had already bought a plane, it hadn't arrived yet, because he had to bring 2 dogs this time. And, of course, because Jiang Hai was used to taking private planes, he rented a private plane to fly to California this time. It was precisely because of this that Jiang Hai couldn't bring too many helpers. Originally, Jiang Hai thought that in addition to Goldie and Xiao Bai, he should also bring the mountain lion. After all, this was a very strong deterrent. The snake and the crocodile were now hibernating, so Jiang Hai didn't know where they were and couldn't wake them up. But after all, they were wild animals, so Jiang Hai couldn't bring them over when it wasn't his private plane. So this time, he only brought Goldie and Little White. Originally, he also wanted to bring Chirps, but considering that Chirps was also a force to be reckoned with in Winthrop, Jiang Hai decided to leave it there. With Jelena and Chirps guarding his mansion, and Belle outside looking after him, there shouldn't be anyone who would want to cause trouble for him. Jiang Hai brought Azalina, Alfred Serra, Chi Jia, Wallace Shelley, Leslie Carter, and Beliak Trotsky, who was already here. In Jiang Hai's opinion, this small team should have no problems. Well, okay, tell the flight crew to have fun in Los Angeles these days. Let's go. Jiang Hai stood up and patted Xiao Bai and Goldie's heads. He smiled slowly, then led the two guys out of the airport. When the others saw Jiang Hai leave, they also followed him out of the airport. California, also known as the Golden State, the State of Gold. In the beginning, people were deceived into immigrating here. The Western development was because there was a considerable amount of gold underground. This state was a state on the western coast of the United States. To be honest, it was very sad here in summer, but in winter, it was the best place for cats to winter. The Chinese were probably quite familiar with this state because it had the City of Angels, Los Angeles, the production center of movies, Silicon Valley, the distribution center of leading brands in the electronics industry, and San Francisco, the Chinese settlement. No matter which one it was, the Chinese had more or less heard of it. After all, there were very few people who hadn't watched Hollywood movies, so they were not too unfamiliar with this big state of the United States. However, a large number of people probably thought that the most important state government in this state should be in Los Angeles. In fact, this was not the case. The state government was located in Sacramento. Yes, it was where the kings were. But now, Jiang Hai and the others were in Los Angeles. There was nothing fun in Sacramento. Of course, his main purpose here, it was to have fun. After all, his goal was not in this City of Angels. Los Angeles was a county and also a city. It was the city of Los Angeles in Los Angeles County. But in addition to Los Angeles, there were many other cities such as Long Beach, Glendale, Santa Clarita, Torrance, Pasadena, Lancaster, Palmdale, Elmont, Inglewood, Downey, West Covina, Norwalk, Burbank, and so on. These small cities basically had a population of about 100,000 people. Other than Long Beach, which was considered an extension of Los Angeles, which had more than 400,000 people, there were very few places with more than 200,000 people, unlike Los Angeles, which had more than 6 million people. Out of the Los Angeles International Airport, Jiang Hai saw Beliak in a black sportswear and a hat in the waiting hall. He had to admit that this East Slav was indeed quite eye-catching here. She had long, silky blonde hair, a slender figure, and a straight asterisk. Although she was trapped in her sweatpants, her tight, but plump upper body, slender waist, and delicate face, which could not be seen clearly, attracted many Americans. However, her aura clearly did not say that she was not to be trifled with, so not many people came to talk to her. Looking at the guy nicknamed White Rabbit standing there, Jiang Hai smiled and walked over with his back facing him. "Hey boss, you're here too." Seeing Jiang Hai walking over, Beliak naturally saw them immediately. After saying something to Jiang Hai with a smile, she naturally looked at the people behind him. "Is everything arranged?" Looking at Beliak, Jiang Hai also asked her with a smile. "Of course, no problem." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Beliak also said with a smile, then naturally took Jiang Hai's arm and walked out of the airport. For a while, the people in the airport, especially the men, looked at Jiang Hai with anger in their eyes. Of course, there was no face-slapping scene here. They just looked at him angrily. If it weren't for Goldie and Xiao Bai, maybe they would have some courage, but now, after walking out of the airport, they arrived at the parking lot. Since Beliak knew that a lot of people would be coming to Jiang Hai this time, he specially rented an MPV. Not many people knew about this car. After all, the Alpha wasn't as well known as Mercedes-Benz, BMW, and the like. But in the MPV world, this was a very good car. After getting in the car, Jiang Hai also helped Goldie and Xiao Bai settle down. Then the car started and headed to the highway outside the airport. In the United States, more than 80% of the highways were free, but there were also some that were charged. Most of these roads led to the residences of wealthy people. This was because these roads were not built by the American government. Instead, they were built by individuals. If you wanted to take this road, you would have to pay those people. This was quite reasonable, because Jiang Hai said that they would stay here for a while. Why? First, it was because Jiang Hai had not been here before, so he wanted to come and play. Second, it was because Jiang Hai and the others still needed to confirm the final purchase of guns, cars, and so on. Therefore, Jiang Hai and the others planned to stay here for more than a week. As for when they would leave, it was still to be decided. It was precisely because of this that Biliak did not rent a house for Jiang Hai in the city center, but rented a villa in Beverly Hills. It was also because of this that they drove here. After passing through the toll highway, Jiang Hai and the others arrived at the fantasy land located west of Los Angeles. Although Beverly Hills was called a mountain villa, it actually occupied a large area, and most importantly, it was a city independent of Los Angeles. There was an elected mayor, a police station, a fire department, and so on. They were all independent, because the people living here were all Hollywood stars and rich people in Los Angeles. The villas and the like were quite luxurious. There were also many people living here, such as the famous Michael Jackson, Madonna, Britney Spears, Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie, and the basketball star O'Neal. There was also the home of the Chinese star Jackie Chan, the boss of Playboy magazine, Emma Roberts, and so on. Jiang Hai knew that Beckham also bought a house here in 2007 and lived here. After all, now that he had retired, his main area of activity had been planned by his wife Victoria to be in a more business-oriented United States, instead of Europe and the old-fashioned country of England. As the car moved forward slowly, it didn't take long for them to arrive at Jiang Hai's temporary residence this time, in front of the villa. The villa that Biliak rented for Jiang Hai was a two-story detached villa. The villa occupied an area of about 300 square meters and 600 square meters from top to bottom. There were 3 garages, and the villa occupied a courtyard by itself. There was a lawn in front and an open-air swimming pool in the back. Looking at the scenery outside, Jiang Hai was quite fond of it because he liked this kind of quiet atmosphere. After the car drove in, Jiang Hai also took a look at the situation inside the villa. The first floor was the living room, dining room, kitchen, and a large bathroom. Other than that, there were only 2 utility rooms. The second floor was the accommodation, with a total of 7 rooms. There was a master bedroom with a separate bathroom, a small kitchen, and a refrigerator. The other 6 rooms were for ordinary people with separate bathrooms, a large bed, and independent air conditioners, televisions, and so on. Overall, Jiang Hai was quite satisfied with this room. Jiang Hai nodded slightly and patted Biliak to show his satisfaction. Biliak felt that Jiang Hai was quite satisfied, so he also smiled. Looking at the villa in front of them, Chi Jia also nodded slightly, and then asked Biliak, "Wow, this villa is not bad. By the way, how much does it cost to buy it?" Chapter 877. This house is about $32 million. Hearing Chi Jia's words, Biliak thought for a moment and said, Beverly Hills was probably the most expensive place in the entire United States, bar none. Even the villas in Long Island could not be more expensive than here. After all, this was the most famous wealthy area in the United States. Well, it's not a bad idea to buy a house here. We can come over and play in the winter. Hearing Biliak's words, Chi Jia nodded gently and then said happily. Hearing what she said, Biliak was stunned for a moment, then suddenly remembered that Chi Jia was also a little rich woman. She had quite a lot of shares in the Chi Group, and she had saved up quite a bit of her annual dividends. Adding in the shares, her net worth was about $1 billion. Spending $30 or $40 million to buy a piece of land wasn't a big deal. Moreover, Biliak and the others knew how much money Jiang Hai had. Well, it's not a bad idea to buy a villa here. Jiang Hai naturally did not care about the tens of millions of dollars. Everything was worth $100 million now. Jiang Hai really didn't care about it. It was not a bad idea to buy a house here and come over occasionally to play. After all, in the winter, Winthrop was a world of ice and snow. There was nothing here. It was a good choice to go to both sides. Of course, they only had this idea now. Buying a house wasn't something that could be easily talked about. After settling down in Beverly Hills, Jiang Hai and the others also had a good time in Los Angeles for the first few days. To be honest, California, where Los Angeles was located, Oregon in the north, Nevada in the east, and Arizona in the east. In Jiang Hai's opinion, these states were not suitable for human habitation because these places were particularly decertified. The world's #1 gambling city, Las Vegas, was in Nevada. What was outside Las Vegas? A desert. Arizona, also known as the Grand Canyon State, was most famous for the Grand Canyon of Colorado. It was a large wasteland and the Gobi Desert. The capital was Phoenix, which was the home of the Suns. Including California, these 3 states were quite decertified. Los Angeles was very good, but outside of Los Angeles, it was very desolate. The grasslands and vegetation did not grow very well. Among the 4 states here, the most suitable one to live in was Oregon. Although the atmosphere in California was not like the Colorado desert, where the temperature was often above 50 degrees, the summer here was also deadly. 40 degrees was not a joke. It was really a temperature that was often reached. It was good to come here in the winter, but to come here in the summer, even though there was an ocean nearby, it wasn't cool at all. There were many manors and farms in California. But here, the land was very good, and the land, it was very expensive. The only plant that grew well here was grapes. These grapes needed a lot of sunlight, which was why they were sweet. Just like in China, the grapes in Xi'an province were the best because it was sunny and there was little rain. It was the same in California. There were many wine manors in California, and the wine produced there was world famous. But compared to the wine produced in Jiang Hai's manors, the wine produced there was still a gap. But it was not a good place to live. It was not bad to open a manor and just have fun here. On the first day, Jiang Hai and the others drove to the Walk of Fame. In front of the Huaxia Theater was the place to leave fingerprints. Jiang Hai and the others also looked for the fingerprints of the celebrities they knew. But after looking for a long time, they only found Jack Chang's, which was Jackie Chan's. Other than Jackie Chan's, they did not find any Chinese. This made Jiang Hai a little puzzled because he had seen a lot of reports in the past saying that many Huaxia celebrities came to the theater to leave their fingerprints. Just as Jiang Hai was puzzled, a tourist told Jiang Hai that if they wanted to find the fingerprints of Chinese celebrities, they could go to the street next to the theater, which was specially for Chinese celebrities to leave their fingerprints. In this regard, Jiang Hai couldn't help but chuckle. Well, this place was divided into A and B versions. After seeing the Walk of Fame, Jiang Hai and the others went to a nearby restaurant to eat authentic California steak. The taste was just SOSO. In the afternoon, Jiang Hai and the others went to Hollywood. It was only because Jiang Hai was very rich that they could go to the shooting scene to watch it. Of course, now, it was mainly a green screen because most of the big productions were done with 3D special effects. Therefore, it was funny to watch on a normal day, but it was different in the cinema. After going back that night, they rested for a night. The next day, they went to Los Angeles' Chinatown. The Chinatown here was in the city center of Los Angeles, where the Chinese lived. But the Chinese here were basically early immigrants from Guangdong province. The Chinatown of the later immigrants from the mainland was mainly in Meng City, which was called Monterey Park City. That was where the immigrants from the mainland lived. But Jiang Hai just came to take a look. At noon, they had a random lunch at the Huaxia restaurant here. After that, they went to Universal Studios in the afternoon and went back to rest for the night. On the third day, Jiang Hai and the others went to Santa Monica. Well, this place was really difficult to reach. It had the best beach in Los Angeles. Jiang Hai and the others came to take a look. The beach and other things made Jiang Hai and the others sick. After seeing the beach, Jiang Hai went to the Staples Center, the home of the Lakers and the Clippers. Jiang Hai bought tickets for 2 games. One was to watch the Lakers. He heard that the core of the Lakers, Kobe Bryant, was going to retire at the end of the season. So, Jiang Hai also came to watch. He hadn't seen Kobe play with his own eyes yet. Speaking of Kobe, Jiang Hai didn't have much to say about him because Jiang Hai didn't like him. Although Jiang Hai recognized Kobe's contribution to the basketball team and his achievements, he didn't like players with this kind of personality and style. Jiang Hai might look like a big and rough guy, but he actually liked players like Nash more. I feel like the wind is blowing gently and the ball goes in. Blow, blow, my pride and indulgence, isn't it? Although Jiang Hai didn't like Kobe, he still chose to come and watch one of his games. It was tonight, the game between the Lakers and the Nuggets. The other game was a few days later, the game between the Clippers and the Rockets. This wasn't the first time Jiang Hai watched an NBA game live. He had watched the All-Star game before, so he was very familiar with the way the game was played. After buying tickets and drinks, he took Chi Jia and Azalina to watch the game. It couldn't be helped. The others weren't interested in basketball. In fact, these two weren't interested either. However, Chi Jia knew Kobe, and Azalina knew that she had to come because she wanted to protect Jiang Hai. It had to be admitted that in the Western world, basketball couldn't compete with football in Europe. In the United States, basketball was no match for football. If one had to say where the biggest market for basketball was, it would probably be the Huaxia. In this game, Kobe also started. In the first quarter, the Lakers played well. In the second quarter, when the bench came on, they had some inexplicable collapses. In fact, this was a common problem for the Lakers. Los Angeles, where the Lakers were located, had always been a big city. In the United States, it was the second most commercial city after New York. This city attracted a lot of attention and a lot of players. However, no matter what city it was, there would be times of prosperity and times of decline. Even the Spurs, who had been a hooligan for more than a decade, were a strong team in the playoffs every year. With a little bit of reinforcement, they would be a favorite to win the championship. Such a team had also chosen Duncan. Naturally, the Lakers were the same. He could attract a lot of players, but he couldn't keep any of them. The current Lakers were actually a very bad team. This year, they were trying their best to get the number 1 pick. Watching the game, it was obvious that Kobe didn't want to retire. He still wanted to improve. However, the problem was that he was the only one who wanted to do so. The current Lakers were basically training rookies and newcomers. Therefore, it was inevitable that they would lose. The opposing Nuggets were not a strong team, so the two bad teams went back and forth. However, in the end, the Lakers were still inferior and lost the game. They welcomed their 4th consecutive loss. Jiang Hai was not a fan, so he didn't feel anything when the Lakers lost. After leaving the arena, he drove back home. After 3 days of playing, Jiang Hai and the others were almost done playing. Now, they were just waiting for him to finish watching the Clippers game. Then, they would be ready to leave. However, they wouldn't be idle for the next few days. There were still some things that needed to be done. First, they needed to buy a car. Yes, Jiang Hai was going to buy a car again. However, he wasn't going to buy a car for fun at home. He was going to buy a car for mining, a military off-road vehicle. In addition, he also needed to buy guns, bulletproof vests, and explosives. Because no one knew what would happen after entering the mine, it was necessary to prepare everything. Chi Jia also needed to prepare a lot of first aid medicine. In addition, Jiang Hai also had to spare a day to visit the guy named Bruce David. Although Jiang Hai was very concerned about the gold mine, he couldn't put the cart before the horse. The badge was actually the most important thing. Jiang Hai's biggest goal in coming here was to figure out the origin of this badge. His sixth sense told him that this matter was not as easy as he thought it would be. Chapter 878. Boss, you must be careful when you go there. I always feel that there's something wrong here. In Jiang Hai's headset, Azalina said with some doubts, Don't worry, I will run if I feel something is wrong. Don't you know how afraid I am of death? How are the preparations going? Listening to Azalina's words, Jiang Hai also asked her with a smile. It's almost done. There is also an anti-material that will probably arrive tomorrow. After you come back today, go and watch the Clippers game tomorrow. We will enter the mountain the day after tomorrow, Azalina said to Jiang Hai after hearing what he said. Okay, then you just have to hurry up, Jiang Hai said with relief after seeing that Azalina was almost ready. Oh, okay. However, at this time, the sound in Jiang Hai's headset began to ring. He glanced at the phone in the car. There was only one bar of signal left. Seeing this, Jiang Hai couldn't help but step on the brakes. He then looked at his phone with some doubts. What the hell is this? At this time, a pickup truck drove in front of him. It didn't look very fast. Jiang Hai waved at him. Hey brother, what's the matter? He has to admit that because the Chinese have a lot of connections in California, the people here are very polite to the Chinese. Seeing Jiang Hai waving his hand, the black uncle who was driving the pickup truck stopped the car. Uncle, is there any signal interference here? Jiang Hai asked with a smile as he looked at the black uncle. Oh, there's no signal interference here, but if you have anything to say, it's best to say it before you enter the town. There was a strong wind 2 days ago that blew down the signal towers in the town and on the mountain. People only came to the town today to fix it. I don't know when the people on the mountain will fix it. This area belongs to the range of the mountain, so there is no signal. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the black uncle said with a smile. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile awkwardly. The signal tower fell? Well, I've always heard that tornadoes are common in America, but aren't they always in the central region? Why would there be such a thing in the coastal area? But in any case, Jiang Hai knew what was going on, so he smiled and thanked the uncle. Then, the black uncle drove away. Jiang Hai also deliberately turned a corner and walked back for about a kilometer. The signal was full. He shook his head helplessly and called Azalina again. After knowing that there was no signal here, Azalina was also a little speechless. However, she could not ask Jiang Hai to come back and go tomorrow or something like that. According to the locals, even they did not know when it would be repaired, let alone them. So she could only ask Jiang Hai to be careful. As for Jiang Hai himself, he did not care very much. His own strength was here. In addition, it was not like there were no weapons in his car. Unless the other party sent a team of dozens of people, otherwise, if they wanted to trouble him, it would be him who caused trouble for them. One had to know that Jiang Hai was not a good person. Okay, I know I'll be careful. You guys be careful too. After saying a few more words to Azalina, Jiang Hai hung up the phone, stepped on the accelerator, and headed toward his destination in the distance. Jiang Hai did not stay in Los Angeles for 2 days in vain. For example, the car he was driving at this time was a very good off-road vehicle. This should even be the best SUV except for limited edition cars, Mercedes-Benz G65 AMG. This time, no one knew what would happen in the mountains. A good car, like a good horse in ancient times, was a necessity. Jiang Hai bought a total of 2 of these cars, and both were bulletproof. Of course, they could not be like his shield, which could even defend against rocket launchers. At most, this car could defend against pistols and rifles. It would probably not be able to defend against large-caliber machine guns. But this level was enough. After buying the car, Jiang Hai went to buy a gun. He had a gun license, and because he was a local tyrant in Winthrop, the Winthrop Police Department gave him the highest gun license. Although he was not allowed to carry a gun on the street, and he had to be separated from his gun in the car, there were no requirements for guns. He came here by plane. Since it was not his own plane, he naturally could not bring his own gun. So he bought a new one in Los Angeles. At this time, there were 2 gun boxes under the back seat of his car. There were 2 .50 caliber Desert Eagles in one of them. Jiang Hai usually liked to use this gun. In addition, there was a Scar assault rifle, which was loaded with 30 magazines. Although it was semi-automatic, it was quite effective. With these weapons, even if Jiang Hai encountered any trouble, he could go into the mountains and get rid of those who wanted to trouble him. Sometimes, people's confidence came from this. This time, he was going to the Giant Mountain Psychiatric Hospital. It was located at the junction of California and Nevada. It was not particularly far from the place where Jiang Hai was going to go into the mountains, but the road was not quite right. It was also a branch of the Colorado mountains, so it looked a little desolate. This psychiatric hospital had been around for a long time. It opened here about 50 years ago. At first, it was run to make money, and the patients were all mentally ill in California. It was in the spirit of humanitarianism, but it certainly did not make much money. In the United States, where everything was based on profits, it was not difficult to abandon children and the elderly, especially those with mental illness. Therefore, It was difficult for this psychiatric hospital to receive money from patients. In addition, mental illness was not cute. It was not like an orphanage that could receive donations. No one would come here to see a mental patient. Therefore, about 20 years ago, after the Nasdaq stock market crash in the United States, the director of this hospital went bankrupt and jumped off a building. Then, all the patients were transferred away. Since then, the hospital had been abandoned. 3 years ago, a multinational company named Mukafu took over the hospital. However, the California government did not want them to run it for profit anymore. Therefore, they became a public psychiatric hospital. Because of its remote location and management regulations, it was specially used to detain those who had committed crimes. It was said that mental patients did not break the law by killing people. Indeed, when they were unconscious, they did not need to be shot for murder. However, no matter which country it was impossible to allow such people to run rampant in society again. This was because the safety of the people would be disregarded. Therefore, those mental patients who had committed serious crimes would be locked up here. While they were being treated, they were also being detained. However, they did not have to do anything. Instead, there were people taking care of them. To put it bluntly, this was actually a prison for mental patients. Moreover, it was not the mild kind of mental patients, but the serious kind of mental patients who would kill people. It was not an exaggeration to say that the people here were all perverted murderers. Bruce David, who Jiang Hai was looking for, was here. Following the road signs on the road, Jiang Hai quickly found the way up the mountain. However, he had to admit that there was probably not much money here. The road up the mountain was quite shabby. It was basically a dirt road with only a short section of the road. If it were not for Jiang Hai's SUV, which had the best jumping ability, he might have felt the car scraping the chassis. Along the way, Jiang Hai's car slowly came to the end of the road. From afar, Jiang Hai saw a huge building. This building was the main body of the Jushan Psychiatric Hospital. Because it was built 50 years ago, it looked like an ancient castle. Around the castle was a 2-meter-high wall with iron wires around it to prevent the patients from escaping. The big iron gate at the entrance looked like a prison. After Jiang Hai parked the car at the entrance, a white man with a baton came over and looked at Jiang Hai. "What's the matter?" Looking at Jiang Hai, he asked in a deep voice. "Usually, not many people came here. I have to go in and look for someone. This is my note." As Jiang Hai said, he took out a piece of paper from the stack of documents and handed it to the guard in front of him. This note was composed of 2 parts. The first part was a note issued by a Los Angeles police station to let Jiang Hai in, and the second part was a Franklin hidden under the note. "Do you have a weapon?" After calmly putting Franklin into his pocket, the big man's expression became a lot more polite. He glanced at Jiang Hai's car, and after confirming that there was no one else inside, he asked Jiang Hai, "What about you?" "Yes, in the car. I don't have it on me." Hearing the guard's words, Jiang Hai replied with a smile. "Then your car can't go in. Park the car outside. You can go in." Shaking his head, the guard pointed to the parking spot for Jiang Hai. After Jiang Hai parked the car, he walked to the front of the gate. After a small door next to the gate opened, Jiang Hai walked into the giant mountain psychiatric hospital. As soon as he walked in, he felt a sense of despair. Jiang Hai walked a few steps inside, and a white man in a guard uniform asked Jiang Hai, "Who is it?" Jiang Hai glanced at him. He felt that this white man was really ugly. His messy hair, sunken eye sockets, inverted all face, pale skin, and yellow teeth. If he wasn't wearing a guard uniform, in Jiang Hai's eyes, he would be scarier than the patients here. Jiang Hai couldn't help but shudder. Chapter 879. "I'm here to visit." Looking at the guard in front of him, Jiang Hai also said politely to him, "You're here to visit? Who are you looking for?" After hearing Jiang Hai's words, the guard came over and said with some doubts, "Quite far away, Jiang Hai can smell the stench in his mouth and the strong smell of disinfectant on his body. It's almost the same as in the hospital, but thinking about it, isn't this a hospital? I'm looking for Bruce David." Suppressing the unhappiness in his heart, Jiang Hai looked at the guard and said, "Oh, you're looking for that man-eating pervert? Go over there. Let me tell you, that guy is not to be trifled with." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, The guard here couldn't help but laugh. It seems that this Bruce David is crazy. Even the people here know that he wants to eat people, which made Jiang Hai feel a little disgusted. But even though he felt a little strange here, he still nodded his head as a form of thanks and walked into the castle. And just as he walked into the castle, the guard couldn't help but turn his head and smile ferociously. Then he slowly turned back and continued to patrol. There were cold concrete buildings everywhere. Guards in police uniforms were either patrolling or standing guard at certain places. Doctors and nurses were carrying some equipment and walking up and down the corridors. And looking from the outside of each room is welded with extremely thick steel bars, sealing the windows, and the sunlight can be seen, but that's all. The glass in the room is integral. Jiang Hai looked at it. It should be bulletproof glass, not worse than the windshield of his shield. This kind of defense is understandable for Jiang Hai, because not only in China, but also in the United States, there are many rich people who kill people or commit crimes. They don't want to go to jail, so they make up a story that they are mentally ill when they kill people. The court can't do anything about it, and there will always be some garbage doctors who testify for these people. Under such circumstances, these prisons are their final destination. And although they can save their lives here, Jiang Hai knows that it's better to die than to live here. So in order to prevent the subordinates of these people from breaking into the prison, the defense here is not ordinary. Jiang Hai secretly estimated that he may not be able to break such glass. Even if he can break it, the steel bars are too dangerous. After Jiang Hai entered the door, Jiang Hai found that they seemed to be looking at him, and that gaze made him a little uncomfortable. But after all, this is a mental hospital, so it's understandable that Jiang Hai feels a little strange. Walking to the reception room in front, Jiang Hai gently knocked on the table. Then a young woman in a white coat raised her head and looked at Jiang Hai with some doubts. Jiang Hai was also looking at this woman. He had to admit that this woman was not bad. She was a typical American golden silk cat. She had long, wavy blonde hair. Her delicate facial features were painted with not too much makeup. She seemed to be quite young. She looked like a begonia who had just woken up from a spring sleep. She was really quite attractive, but Jiang Hai did not have any thoughts of flirting with her. Did he know where she worked? She has been in contact with these mental patients for so long. Who knows if she will have any problems? Hello, how can I help you? Looking at Jiang Hai, the woman in front of him said politely, I'm here to find Bruce David. This is my pass. Jiang Hai said as he handed the pass to the woman. After the woman looked at it and determined that there was no problem, she stood up and glanced outside. Paul, take this gentleman to Bruce David's ward. As his voice fell, a fat white guard came over and didn't speak. He just glanced at Jiang Hai faintly and walked inside. Jiang Hai also nodded to the blonde woman and followed him into the hospital. Opening an electromagnetic door, the guard led Jiang Hai into a passage. At the end of the passage, there was an elevator. When the elevator reached the third floor, it stopped. Jiang Hai also looked outside. The entire third floor is very simple. In front of him is a passage. There are many guards standing on both sides of the passage, and there are many paths in the passage dividing the passage. Jiang Hai may not know the specific structure, but it seems to be not much different from an ordinary hospital, but the protection is stricter. After getting off the elevator, Jiang Hai also followed the fat guard named Paul all the way inside. Along the way, Jiang Hai felt that the way these guards looked at him was a bit strange. 30% curiosity, 20% numbness, and 50% surprise. Feeling the emotions passed by them, this made Jiang Hai a little confused. Why is it a surprise? After thinking about it, Jiang Hai didn't quite understand. Maybe it's because he hasn't seen normal people here for too long. After all, it's quite difficult for them to do this job. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai also let go of the thoughts in his heart. He just came to ask Bruce David about the badge. After asking, he will leave. While thinking about things in his heart, Jiang Hai followed the fat guard in front of him to the innermost room in the corner of the third floor. This is it. Walking to the door, the fat guard couldn't help but say a little stupidly. Then he took out a set of keys from his waist and prepared to open the door. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Jiang Hai also glanced at the door sign outside the room. It indeed says Bruce David. It seems that this time he should find the right person. If you have anything to say, ask as soon as possible. At this moment, the fat guard had already opened the door and motioned Jiang Hai to go in. Jiang Hai glanced at him, then smiled, bowed his head, and walked into the room. But just as he walked into the room, Jiang Hai's nose twitched. It was the smell of blood. Yes, Jiang Hai smelled the smell of blood at this moment. When he looked at the bed, his pupils dilated because at this time, a person was tied to the bed. This person looked to be in his 20s. His hands and feet were handcuffed to the bed, forming an X shape. A white cloth was tied in his mouth, but the white cloth was now covered in blood. Looking down, Jiang Hai found that this person's stomach had been opened at this time. His intestines, heart, and liver were all over the bed. The most important thing was that this man was wearing a guard's shirt. At this moment, Jiang Hai also felt a gust of wind behind him. Needless to say, this was the fat man behind him attacking him. Without saying anything, Jiang Hai directly turned around and kicked. What a joke! He had 8 times the physical fitness. With this kick, the fat man was directly kicked out and heavily smashed into the corridor window. His huge weight, coupled with Jiang Hai's strength, smashed the bulletproof glass into a spider web, but it did not break under such circumstances. After dealing with this fat man, Jiang Hai knew that the situation here was not right. He subconsciously wanted to run out, but at this time the guards standing in the corridor seemed to have gone crazy. They shouted incoherently and pounced on Jiang Hai crazily. Looking at the stun batons in their hands and their crazy appearance, Jiang Hai was a little scared. To be honest, although Jiang Hai was fierce, he was still a normal person. At the same time, he remembered that there were so many guards here. If these guards were all like this, even if he had 8 times the physical fitness, he probably wouldn't be able to survive. When a normal person encounters a lunatic, their first thought is not to fight, but to escape. Jiang Hai was the same at this time. When these people ran over, Jiang Hai tore off the key plate from the fat guard's body. He didn't know if there was a backup, but it was always good to tear it off. Then he quickly flashed into the room and closed the door. When he held the door handle, he felt a pain in his palm. Then he saw a needle taped to the inside of the door handle. Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai couldn't help but curse. He was really unlucky. But this was not the time to think about this. Jiang Hai directly locked the door. At this time, the crazy guards had already rushed to the door, constantly roaring and smashing the door in front of them with their hands and stun batons in their hands. He had to admit that the quality of this door was quite good. These people even used their heads and hands to smash, smashing flesh and blood everywhere. But the door still didn't move. Seeing that it was temporarily safe, Jiang Hai's mind suddenly became sluggish. Jiang Hai didn't know what the medicine in the needle was, but he didn't expect that he could still move so fast with 8 times the physical limit of an ordinary person. This was Jiang Hai thinking too much. The medicine in the needle was a mixture of the highest concentration of tranquilizers and some drugs that couldn't be injected. A little bit was enough to paralyze people instantly. It was already amazing that Jiang Hai could hold on for so long before feeling a little dizzy. Glancing at the guards who were still crazily smashing the door in front of him, Jiang Hai took a deep breath, suppressed his dizziness, and then lifted the heavy wardrobe next to him. This time, even if those people smashed the door, Jiang Hai was not afraid. Just as the door was blocked, Jiang Hai also felt his head getting dizzier and more uncomfortable. He tripped, fell to the ground, and fell into a deep sleep. Chapter 880. Not knowing how long it took, Jiang Hai slowly got up from the ground, moving his stiff body and neck, and his mouth made meaningless sounds. Don't get me wrong, Jiang Hai didn't turn into a zombie, but he slept here. After about a minute of movement, Jiang Hai recovered. He had to admit that the dosage of the drug in the needle was really too large. Although he couldn't identify the name of the drug for some reason, Jiang Hai, who had been buying medicine with Qi Jie recently, knew a little about it. Thanks to his physical fitness that was beyond the limits of ordinary people, otherwise, it wouldn't be as simple as sleeping. Those drugs were enough to destroy the cells in the human brain. If a normal person was injected, it was estimated that they would sleep for 3 days. The most important thing was that after sleeping for 3 days, no one knew whether they would become an idiot after waking up. After moving his neck, Jiang Hai first glanced at the mobile phone. It was 8:10 in the evening, and there was still no signal. He couldn't go on the internet, and he couldn't make a phone call. The mobile phone was useless now, except for taking pictures and videos. He looked at the surrounding situation. The sky outside was completely dark. Except for the moon and stars, it was dark everywhere. Through the reflection, Jiang Hai seemed to see some rooms downstairs, and there was still some light. His car was still parked outside the wall at this time, but he didn't know when it started, but the guard outside had disappeared. He didn't know if he was taken away by the lunatics here, or if that person was also a lunatic. However, as long as the car was still there, Jiang Hai was not worried because there were guns and gasoline inside. As long as he escaped the car, he would be safe. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. But just as he took a breath, he smelled a strange smell. The smell of blood in the room was getting stronger and stronger. Jiang Hai glanced at the corpse. Although he didn't know when it died, it seemed that it should have been dead for 2 days because the corpse was already smelly and the blood flowing out had solidified. Damn it, what's going on? Looking at the scene in front of him, Jiang Hai couldn't help but mutter in a low voice. It wasn't like he hadn't killed people before, so he wasn't afraid of the dead. He was also a materialist. Well, he firmly believed that there were no ghosts in this world, and that he was the only special one. Therefore, he wasn't afraid of ghosts. It was precisely because of this that he felt that he wasn't afraid, even though he was sleeping here. Standing up, Jiang Hai walked to the front of the dead body and rummaged in his pocket. Not to mention, he really found one not long after. This should be something like a Hun card. On it was written the guard, Whale's Cage. There was some detailed information on him, such as when he was a stranger, and there was also a barcode that belonged to him. With this thing, he could open the magnetic door outside. Jiang Hai thought for a moment and put the card away. He remembered that if he wanted to get out of here, he would need this thing. Putting the Hun card in his pocket, Jiang Hai began to think about this matter. If he guessed correctly, it might be a lunatic who went berserk, or some organization or something like that captured this place. The time was probably when the black uncle said that the wind blew down the signal tower. Jiang Hai didn't know how these people did it, and if these people really went berserk, why didn't they escape after capturing this place? But just thinking of this, Jiang Hai couldn't help but laugh at himself. He forgot that they were patients. Maybe in their eyes, he was the guard here, the doctor and the nurse here. Anyway, I came here today to find Bruce David. I must find him, but how do I find him? I don't even know what he looks like. After muttering in a low voice, Jiang Hai touched his chin and said, after thinking about it, he decided to go out first. After all, this is a prison-like psychiatric hospital, so they must have information and monitoring rooms here. The monitoring room can tell Jiang Hai what happened here, and the information room can help him find Bruce David's appearance and then find this person. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai also nodded and gently moved the wardrobe away. But just as he moved the medical cabinet, Jiang Hai couldn't help but take a deep breath. He was a little glad that he moved the wardrobe here, because at this time, the door here was broken by some sharp weapon. Was it an axe or a machete? It was still a kitchen knife. Anyway, the wooden door was now full of debris. Even the wide area could be dug in with one hand. If Jiang Hai didn't block the door with the cabinet, this hand might have directly opened the door from inside. At that time, he would have to face these lunatics. Jiang Hai couldn't help but shudder when he imagined it. It seemed that his life was saved unknowingly. Gently opening the door, Jiang Hai took out the needle. After thinking about it, he tore a clean sheet and put the needle away. Although he was hit, there was still some residual medicine in it. It was enough to deal with ordinary people. After putting the needle away, Jiang Hai slowly opened the door here. Picking up his phone, Jiang Hai first took pictures of the left and right sides. After confirming that there was no one, he walked out. Walking toward the corner of the 3rd floor, he didn't know if the lunatics had gone to rest now. The corridor that was full of people in the morning was empty at this time. Jiang Hai walked slowly in the corridor. At this time, Jiang Hai showed the advantage of wearing sneakers. Because the footsteps were light, there was no sound. If he wore leather shoes, unless he was barefoot, the footsteps would be loud. But there was such a needle on the door handle. What if there was one on the door? Then wouldn't Jiang Hai be seeking death? Walking slowly along the wall, Jiang Hai didn't have night vision. Just like in the deep sea, he also had to use a headlamp to illuminate the direction he was going, but his vision in the dark was still good. In addition, his sensitivity and sense of smell were 8 times that of ordinary people, so he still felt quite safe. As he walked, Jiang Hai walked to the other corner and took a picture with his phone. After confirming that there was no one here, Jiang Hai let out a sigh of relief. Not far ahead, he remembered that there was an elevator. Next to it was the safety passage for going up and down. Next to the safety passage, there must be a building map of the building because it was used to evacuate people. If there was a fire or something, people couldn't find the building map, even if they wanted to. Thinking about it, there should be no one on the 3rd floor at this time. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai slowly walked to the stairs on the 3rd floor. Sure enough, there was an evacuation structure map of this building here. There were a total of 4 maps: the 3rd floor, the 2nd floor, the 1st floor, and the basement. The structure of the 3rd floor was relatively simple here. There were only 6 lines in total. 2 horizontal lines divided the entire floor into 3 parts, and 4 vertical lines delineated the passages for the floors. However, the 3rd floor was all wards, and there was nothing else. The monitoring room Jiang Hai was looking for was on the 2nd floor, and the reference room was in the basement. After thinking about it, he had to pass by the 2nd floor anyway. Jiang Hai also wanted to know what happened here. But just as he was about to enter the 2nd floor through the safety passage, the elevator suddenly moved from the 1st floor to the 3rd floor. Needless to say, it must be those lunatics coming back. So Jiang Hai flashed and entered the safety passage. But just as he flashed in, he found that there were also people walking up in the safety passage. Hearing these footsteps, Jiang Hai couldn't help but curse. Fortunately, he quickly calmed down because there were probably only 2 people listening to the footsteps. He could still deal with 2 people. With a sigh of relief, Jiang Hai hid behind the door of the safety passage on the 3rd floor. Not long after, the people who took the elevator over there arrived first. Jiang Hai looked through the crack of the door. This was a team of about 14 or 15 people. Because mental hospitals were like normal hospitals, they often needed to push beds and the like for treatment. Therefore, the elevators here were quite large. It could reasonably sit 21 people, but it seemed that there should only be 17 or 18 guards on the 3rd floor. After all, there was nothing else on the 3rd floor, right? After these people left here, Jiang Hai put more attention on the passage. It seemed that lunatics sometimes knew that they needed to exercise, so they would climb stairs and so on. Listening to the footsteps getting closer and closer, Jiang Hai also took a breath. He must not let these 2 people make a sound and attract other people. At this moment, Jiang Hai also saw the 2 guards who appeared at the corner of the passage. Jiang Hai didn't say much. Although lunatics subconsciously made normal people feel afraid, Jiang Hai was not a normal person now. With a step, he instantly jumped over 9 steps and appeared in front of the 2 guards who were still climbing the stairs. Smelling the strong smell of disinfectant on their bodies, Jiang Hai knew that these 2 people were lunatics. Without saying anything, he immediately grabbed the necks of these 2 people. The 2 people only reacted at this time. When they wanted to reach for the stun baton, it was already too late. Jiang Hai's hands exerted force. In an instant, only 2 cracking sounds were heard. The necks of the 2 people tilted to the other side, and then their bodies softened unconsciously. Seeing this, Jiang Hai couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Looking at the trash can not far away, Jiang Hai didn't say much. He directly threw the bodies of the 2 people into the trash can, and then went to the 2nd floor. Chapter 881. Before reaching the safety passage on the 2nd floor, Jiang Hai breathed a sigh of relief, then slowly looked at the 2nd floor. Compared to the darkness on the 3rd floor, the 2nd floor, it's not as dark as the 3rd floor. Because there are lights here, but many of the lights seem to be broken. There's only a small light far away, and everywhere is particularly dim. And this is a mental hospital. There is no way to know if there is a mental patient lying in ambush in the darkness. Although Jiang Hai's eyesight is good, such a dim light really makes it difficult for him. He wants to pretend to be a mental patient and pretend to be a doctor, nurse, or guard, but there is a problem. From the doctors to the guards, or the patients here, there is no Asian. At least, Jiang Hai has never seen one before. If he goes to pretend, he really doesn't know if he will be exposed. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai can't help but have a headache. But if he goes in like this, the situation of the enemy and himself is unknown. It is really troublesome. But since he's already here, he can't just escape and go back empty-handed. Gritting his teeth, Jiang Hai decided to go in and take a look. Slowly pushing open the door on the second floor in front of him, Jiang Hai walked in slowly. But as soon as he walked in, he found that the entire second floor is full of the smell of blood and disinfectant. According to Jiang Hai's memory of the floor, the medical room, the nurse's station, the operating room, the monitoring room, and the security lounge are actually on the second floor. Now, with such a strong smell of blood, it seems that a lot of people have died here. Jiang Hai walked slowly inside, very careful because he doesn't know if there are mental patients on this floor. Feeling that his heart is about to jump out, Jiang Hai calmed his nervous mood while looking at the situation in front of him. Suddenly, in the shadow in front of him, a slightly withered hand stretched out, but it startled Jiang Hai. When Jiang Hai looked over, he found that the owner of the hand is an uncle in a wheelchair. It seems that this white uncle is 60 or 70 years old, balding, both sides of his hair are white, and his body is thin. Sitting in the wheelchair, he didn't make a sound, nor did he move. He just stared straight at Jiang Hai. If it weren't for his turbid eyes still moving with Jiang Hai's movement, Jiang Hai might have thought that he is already dead. Seeing that Jiang Hai stood there motionless, the uncle slowly put down his hand, but he was still staring at Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai's sixth sense told him that this guy might not be a threat to him. So he took a deep breath, bypassed the uncle, and continued to walk inside. Not long after, he arrived at the nurse's station. Anyone who had been to the hospital knew that the doctors had their own offices, but the nurses didn't. The nurse's station they were in was an empty space in the middle of two corridors. There was a table with some medicine and other things on it. In front of the nurse's station, there was a TV, probably to prevent the nurses from being bored at night from doing their duties. At this time, the TV in the nurse's station is on, but because there is no signal, the TV in front of the nurse's station is like a snowflake. Two bald people in patient clothes are sitting there motionless, watching the TV in front of them. Seeing this strange scene, Jiang Hai felt his scalp tingle. He is not afraid of normal people. Even if they are special forces, Jiang Hai can beat them. Most importantly, he can understand their thoughts through their movements. But facing these mental patients, how can Jiang Hai deal with them? You don't know what they are thinking, and you don't know what they are going to do. The unknown is the biggest fear of human beings. Jiang Hai looked at the two people in front of him, and he felt a little scared. However, he had to pass by the nurse's station, so he had to go there. As soon as he walked out, he didn't know if the two of them had some special hearing ability, but they immediately sensed Jiang Hai's presence and looked at him. When they looked at Jiang Hai quickened his steps to shut them up. But to Jiang Hai's surprise, the two people didn't shout after seeing him. Instead, they turned their heads back and looked at the TV in front of them. Jiang Hai, who was originally moving forward, can't help but stop. Could it be that these two people are not in the same group as those crazy people? Thinking of this, Jiang Hai walked in front of the two people and waved his hand in front of the first person. "Hey, you're blocking my view of the TV." Jiang Hai waved his hand, and the person on this side spoke. Hearing him speak, Jiang Hai was also stunned for a moment, and then he couldn't help laughing at himself. It seems that he was mistakenly knocked down by those guards. Those guards only know how to shout, but mental patients are not mutes. Why can't they speak? It seems that the person in front of him should be less mentally ill. At least he can communicate with him. "I'm really sorry. Can you tell me what happened here?" Jiang Hai looked at the two people in front of him and asked them, "What happened? Isn't it the same as usual?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the person on this side said with some doubts, "It's not the same, didn't you see that the nurses who picked us up have changed? And the chef has also changed." After hearing this person's words, the bald man next to him turned his head and looked at Jiang Hai with a serious face and said to him, "Oh, that's right, the chef seems to have changed. The food he made is too disgusting. There is still feces in the intestines he made today. There is still feces, Look, Sun Wukong is going to beat the white bone demon." After hearing the words of the other person, this person made a look of sudden realization, then pointed to the TV and said, "Don't talk nonsense, that's Kong." Hearing this person's words, the other person said with slight contempt, "It turns out to be Kong. Is Kong's surname Fu?" Hearing this, the person nodded seriously, then asked him, "No, Ziwei was taken away by the Black Mountain, which, besides his surname, is Kong. Cough, do you know Bruce David?" Looking at the two people in front of him who seemed to want to talk, Jiang Hai had to interrupt them and ask about his goal this time. "Bruce David? The guy who eats people?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, one of them asked with some doubts. "Yes, that's him. Do you know him?" Seeing that this person knew Jiang Hai's goal, Jiang Hai also asked immediately, "I've heard of him, but I haven't seen him. Maybe he was eaten by the Black Mountain, which he..." Scratching his head, Jiang Hai decided to give up talking about this with him. He felt that he was going to become mentally ill. "Excuse me, where is the monitoring room?" Shaking his head and throwing this feeling out of his mind, Jiang Hai asked the two people, "It's over there. But speaking of it, the fat man in the monitoring room has been lying there for 4 days." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the person here pointed to a room in the distance and said to Jiang Hai, "Maybe he's sleepy. I often see him watching movies without sleeping at night. He's really amazing. He can watch dozens of TV shows at the same time. TSK, I really envy him." At this time, another person also said. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also smiled, then walked to the monitoring room. Looking in from the outside, there was indeed a fat man in a guard uniform lying there. If this fat man didn't have 2 kitchen knives on him, it might be more harmonious. Jiang Hai slowly pushed open the door of the monitoring room. After confirming that there was no one inside, he walked into the monitoring room. The monitoring room may be the brightest room in the vicinity. More than a dozen surveillance cameras were swaying, so naturally, it was very clear. Jiang Hai walked to the fat guard's side and touched his artery. After confirming that he was dead, he helplessly lifted him up and threw him to the open space in the distance. Then he sat in his position. He wanted to see what happened 4 days ago. Fortunately, the monitoring video here was saved every 7 days. Now, the monitoring video hasn't been saved for 4 days. Jiang Hai turned to the video from 4 days ago. At the time of the accident, there should be a hurricane outside, so even the guards outside withdrew into the castle. This castle has been built for 50 years, and it has just been repaired recently. Everything is very strong, so although the wind is whistling outside, the people inside are very calm and do what they should do. However, things went wrong around 12 o'clock in the morning. At that time, it was lunchtime. More guards went to lunch, and the location of the incident was on the 3rd floor. On the left side of the 3rd floor, in Ward 3017, a guard walked into the room with a stack of magazines. After entering the room, he didn't come out for a long time. When he came out again, he was wearing a patient's gown inside and a guard's uniform outside. This patient felt like a Real guard. He took the key, opened the door on the 3rd floor one by one, and then released a lot of lunatics. Under his command, these lunatics rushed to the staircase on the 3rd floor. At this time, there was also news from the monitoring room. The guards in the restaurant on the 1st floor rushed to the 3rd floor immediately, wanting to suppress these lunatics. But they didn't expect that the lunatic who pretended to be a guard went to the 2nd floor. After electrocuting the nurse with a taser, he played there for a long time. If Jiang Hai guessed correctly, he should be making the drug that could make him faint. Then, while the guards and the patients who rushed down to the 3rd floor were fighting on the 1st floor, he returned to the 3rd floor and stayed in every room for a while. If Jiang Hai guessed correctly, he should be wrapping the needle with tape. Then he hid on the 2nd floor. Soon, the guards caught the lunatics. After all, they were disobedient, so they were dealt with a taser. They were subdued quite quickly. About 2 hours later, the riot subsided. At this time, the signal tower outside was also cut off. Then, these guards escorted the prisoners into their respective rooms on the third floor. But after entering, they didn't come out again. When they came out again, the prisoners were wearing the guards' uniforms because almost all of them were hit when the door was closed. Chapter 882. It said that there is only a thin line between a lunatic and a genius. I didn't believe it at first, but now I believe it. If it was an ordinary person, no one would do this. With his chin in his hand, Jiang Hai said helplessly. The next video was very simple. Basically, after these lunatics solved the security guards, they went to solve the doctors, nurses, and the guards outside. After taking care of these people, they pretended to be these people. For some reason, although they captured this place, they didn't leave. Instead, they continued to stay here as if they were really the guards here. Well, it's difficult for Jiang Hai to understand the thoughts of mental patients. Maybe they think so in their shallow consciousness. Whatever, let's go to the basement and see where the reference room is. The sooner I find Bruce David, the sooner I can leave this damn place. I'll leave this to the police. Rubbing his neck, Jiang Hai whispered. Then he switched back to the video in front of him and prepared to use the surveillance to see the situation in the basement. After transferring the surveillance, Jiang Hai searched the basement, checked the situation of the reference room, and worked out a way to go down. Soon he found a way to go down, but the situation was a little bad because the safe passage can only go to the first to third floors. The basement where the reference room is located can't be accessed through the safe passage. There are only two ways to go down. One is to go through the outside passage, and the other is to take the elevator. Now it's definitely too late to go to the outside passage, and Jiang Hai doesn't know where this passage is, so he can only take the elevator. If he takes the stairs, isn't this telling those bastards that he's going down? Just when Jiang Hai was a little hesitant, the corner of his eyes swept across the power distribution room in the distance. In his eyes, a man in a guard uniform walked into the power distribution room. He may have seen the moving camera. He couldn't help but smile evilly at Jiang Hai on the other side of the camera, and then suddenly pulled down the switch. Then all the TVs in front of Jiang Hai went black. Before the black screen, Jiang Hai memorized the appearance of the man. If he is not mistaken, that man should be the mastermind of this incident. Who the F***CK? Seeing the man pull down the power switch, Jiang Hai couldn't help but curse. Now the entire prison was out of power, which meant that the lights in the entire prison were out. There was still some light in the past, but now it was completely gone. Only some emergency lights were still there, which made the entire mental hospital extremely dim. At the same time, there was also a strange green light, the emergency exit light. The already terrifying atmosphere instantly reached a limit. However, although Jiang Hai was not easily frightened, he knew that the elevator also needed electricity. Just now, he was thinking about how to use the elevator to go down, whether he should kill his way in or not. Now it seems that he was thinking too much because the elevator can't be used. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai couldn't help but curse. Just as Jiang Hai's mind was racing to figure out how to get down, all the patients on the second floor started howling like crazy due to the lack of electricity, especially the two people who had pointed the way for Jiang Hai just now. They were destroying everything as if they had gone mad. At the same time, they were also shouting, "TV, TV, TV." Hearing their roars, Jiang Hai couldn't help but touch his forehead. Well, it seems that I have to go through a battle this time if I want to go out. But just as Jiang Hai was struggling, the door of his video room was suddenly opened. A very strong guy ran in crazily. With the dim light, Jiang Hai could see that this guy was a big guy. He was about 1 meter tall. His body should have been muscular before, but at this time, it had become fat. The guard uniform on his body was torn apart. The most important thing was that this guy's mouth was sewn shut for some reason. Only a coaxing sound could be heard. Looking at Jiang Hai, he directly pounced on him. Jiang Hai was also very familiar with the pouncing action. It was the commonly used pounce in wrestling. With such a physique, if he was pounced on, then the next person he pounced on would be miserable. But unfortunately, Jiang Hai was not an ordinary person. Seeing the fat man pouncing on him, Jiang Hai didn't say a word. He directly kicked the fat man's chin. The huge impact directly sent the fat man flying toward the ceiling in the direction he came from. With a bang, he slammed heavily on the door in the distance. This powerful force deformed the metal iron door. But it was precisely because of this sound that the mental patients who were just watching TV, who were originally destroying everything around, rushed to the surveillance room like crazy at this time. Jiang Hai noticed this scene and couldn't help but shake his head helplessly. Run. He couldn't kill all the people in this mental hospital. Otherwise, it would be useless even if he escaped. This was a big case. His money couldn't protect him, so he had to hide if he could. But now it seemed that there was no place to hide. Just as Jiang Hai felt a little headache, he suddenly saw the vent above. The scenes from the movies he watched in the past instantly appeared in his mind. Taking a stool next to him, Jiang Hai jumped and grabbed the position of the vent. Then, he shrank his body and came under the vent. Looking inside, Jiang Hai couldn't help but curse. Movies are bad. When he watched movies in the past, the vents were huge. Not to mention climbing inside. The male and female protagonists could even have sex inside. But now, Jiang Hai looked over and found that it was good enough that he could lie flat in the vent, let alone move. But there was no other way. Now, he could only hide like this. Then he got into the vent, laid his body flat, and just lay there. Perhaps because his body was too wide, there was really no way to move here. Just as Jiang Hai was lying down, the mental patients also crazily rushed in. But after looking around, except for the guard who had the same aura as them, there was no one else. This also made them vent their anger on the guard. Maybe because the bites and blows on his body were too heavy. The guard, who was originally confused to the point of losing his fighting strength, was able to recover. After forcibly knocking away a few mental patients, he quickly ran out of the door and fled. Feeling the sound under his body gradually fading away, Jiang Hai also took a long breath, then slowly jumped down from the passage. Originally, he wanted to leave directly, but considering the evidence, Jiang Hai still took out the CD of the surveillance video here. After putting it in his pocket, Jiang Hai quietly sneaked out of the surveillance room. According to his memory, he walked toward the elevator. Just as Jiang Hai said, if he wanted to go to the basement, he must take the elevator. There was only one way to go, but now there was a power outage. He thought about it again, and it was not entirely a bad thing, because with his strength, he could climb to the basement through the elevator shaft, but he had to see where the elevator stopped at this time. If it stopped directly in the basement, it would be easy. If it stopped on the first or second floor, it would be troublesome. Even if it stopped on the third floor, it would be easy because Jiang Hai could enter the elevator, but he could not make a hole at the bottom of the elevator. Although the fat guard attacked Jiang Hai and was probably a mental patient, he also did a good thing. He led all the mental patients on the second floor away. These mental patients did not care whether you were with them or not. Now, they just wanted to vent because there was no TV to watch. Feeling his way in the dark, Jiang Hai slowly walked to the front of the elevator. Glancing at the closed elevator door, Jiang Hai directly removed a folding stool from the side, then made an iron pipe and forcefully stuffed it into the gap of the elevator door. After exerting some force, he made a gap big enough for 2 hands to fit in. Jiang Hai then released the iron rod and exerted force with his arms. Only a few creaking sounds could be heard. The elevator door was abruptly opened by Jiang Hai. Half of his body was forcefully squeezed in. He then took out his mobile phone and shone it. He saw the steel cables in front of him that were responsible for pulling the elevator and the elevator that was stopped at the bottom. He had to admit that Jiang Hai's luck was good. The elevator stopped at the bottom, so after he flashed into the elevator, he jumped, grabbed the steel cable, and slowly slid down. In about a few minutes, Jiang Hai slid from the second floor to the first floor of the basement. He found the escape passage above the elevator. Jiang Hai used his strength and opened the passage directly. Then he took the iron rod behind him and jumped down from the entrance of the passage. But the moment he jumped into the passage and landed in the elevator, a voice suddenly sounded from behind him. "Ooh, great! Are you here to save me? It's too hot here." Hearing this slightly familiar voice, Jiang Hai couldn't help but look back. On the other side of the elevator, in his line of sight, a blonde beauty was standing there at this time, but he didn't know if it was because of the heat or something else. The woman's clothes were almost taken off, leaving only a pair of underwear on her body. Her upper body was bare. Seeing Jiang Hai looking over, she was still smiling and wiping her sweat. She was not shy at all. Jiang Hai also recognized her at this time. She was the beautiful female receptionist today. But why is she here? Does that person already know that I'm going to leave from the elevator? Is there an ambush outside the elevator at this time? Thinking of this, Jiang Hai felt a chill on his back. Did he fall into a trap? Chapter 883. Why are you here? Looking at the half-naked woman in front of him, Jiang Hai asked her with some doubts. At the same time, he looked at the door in the distance with vigilance. At the same time, his body came under the door that he came down from. If he feels that the situation is wrong, he will jump up immediately. Are you kidding me? He doesn't want to die. Me? I live in the basement. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the woman said with some puzzlement, and then said very confidently. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but slap his forehead. Asking me this? I mean, why are you in the elevator? Looking at the woman, Jiang Hai said to her, I just finished eating and then went to the toilet. Now I'm going back to sleep, but the elevator was about to arrive, but the power went out. Hey, why are you asking so many questions? Aren't you here to save me? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the woman said with some impatience, and hearing what she said, Jiang Hai was a little relieved. It seems that this woman is just a misunderstanding, although he is still a little uncertain. I'm sorry, I'm actually not here to save you. I'm going to the basement. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai thought for a while and said. Hearing that Jiang Hai is not here to save her, the woman couldn't help but sigh helplessly. That's a pity. I thought you were here to save me. Well, you can go. I'm waiting for someone to save me. After that, the woman continued to stand there leaning against the wall, talking about the heat while looking at the ceiling helplessly. Looking at her situation, Jiang Hai couldn't help but feel a little overwhelmed. After thinking for a while, he walked to the door. Whether it's a blessing or a curse, it can't be avoided. Now is not the time to be entangled with this thing. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai used his arms to open the door directly and then glanced outside. It was dark outside, but it seems that there should be no one. This also made Jiang Hai breathe a sigh of relief. Then he used his arms to open the elevator door as quietly as possible, enough for him to pass through, and then walked out of the elevator. Originally, he thought that when he opened the elevator door, the woman would follow him out, but he didn't see the woman come out, which made Jiang Hai a little confused. You don't want to come out? Returning to the elevator, Jiang Hai asked the woman. It doesn't matter. I'll wait for someone to save me. You go first. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the woman shook her head and said with certainty. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai had nothing else to say at this time. But then he remembered that this woman is a mental patient. He couldn't help but feel a little funny, always thinking of mental patients with a normal person's mind. He is the one who is sick. I'm here to save you, come out. Jiang Hai helplessly waved at her and said. Hearing that Jiang Hai is here to save her, the woman couldn't help but be happy and squeezed out of the elevator with a smile. Wow, the air outside is still fresh. Sniffing the air in the basement, the woman said excitedly, you don't want to put on your clothes? Seeing the woman running out so naked, Jiang Hai was also stunned. He had to admit that this woman's figure was quite good. As said before, this woman's 5 views were very delicate, very beautiful, and her long blonde hair was also very beautiful. Except for the smell of disinfectant on her body, she looked like a goddess during the day. At this time, she was only wearing a pair of underwear. Her figure was perfectly displayed. She was about 1.75 meters tall, almost 1 meter's long legs, slender, straight, and abnormally white and tender. Her originally slender waist, maybe because she stayed here for a long time, there was a small circle of fat, but it didn't look fat. Instead, it looked very cute. Her plump upper body was estimated to be above D level, and at the same time was quite perky. It can be said that if this woman is not a mental patient, when she goes out, she must be a goddess-level existence. Jiang Hai can imagine that if such a woman appeared on the beach of California, there will be a lot of people coming to hit on her. But now is not the time to pick up girls, so she stood beside Jiang Hai like this. Jiang Hai was also a little confused. No, it's too hot. I'm sorry to trouble you. I need you to save me. Where are you going now? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the woman shook her head with a smile, and then asked Jiang Hai with a curious look. I'm going to the reference room. Looking at the woman, Jiang Hai said to her, It just so happens that I'm going the same way. Let's go together. When she heard that Jiang Hai was going to the reference room, the woman also said with a smile, and then took the initiative to walk forward. Jiang Hai looked at her and didn't know what to say, but this saved him the trouble of looking for her. Looking at her walking forward, Jiang Hai also followed her and walked forward. This woman is really familiar with this place. But what surprised Jiang Hai is that although there are a lot of bloodstains on the ground in the basement, there is no one and no body, which makes Jiang Hai a little puzzled. But he can't ask directly, so he can only continue to walk forward with the woman. Not long after, the woman stopped and pointed to a room next to her. This is the reference room. Hearing the woman's words, Jiang Hai also looked at the room. This room is indeed the reference room that Jiang Hai has been looking for because there's a door sign on it. But the protection of this reference room seems to be too good. The outside door is a huge anti-theft door, and it is also a magnetic door. The magnetic door can be set when there is electricity. Some of them are automatically opened when there is no electricity, such as the door of some rooms. This is also for fear of a fire. If there is a power outage and prisoners are burned to death inside, then it will be interesting. Some of them were closed, such as important places. Some materials would rather be burned than be easily seen by others. Obviously, this was the case with this reference room. Although Jiang Hai wasn't sure why this reference room was closed. Since it was closed, it meant that the people in this organization didn't want others to see the things inside. But since it was closed, it meant that the people in this organization didn't want others to see it. What should I do now? Looking at the closed door, Jiang Hai whispered, and hearing Jiang Hai's words, the woman who had been looking around also came over, looked at the locked door, and shook her head. This door is locked. It can't be opened. If you want to open it, you have to turn on the power. Looking at Jiang Hai, the woman said to Jiang Hai. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also sighed. In fact, he has been avoiding fighting with these lunatics all the way. After all, if Jiang Hai doesn't kill them, then he will die. If Jiang Hai kills too many people, when the police come in and find that Jiang Hai killed so many people, although it is said to be self-defense, there will always be trouble. But now, thinking of the guy who pulled the switch in the electric control room, Jiang Hai feels that if he doesn't deal with that guy, then it will be difficult for Jiang Hai to find the person he is looking for and escape. Where is the power room? Do you know? Since he has to face it head-on, Jiang Hai has nothing to worry about. He turned to look at the woman beside him. Jiang Hai asked her. Of course. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the woman also said with a smile, and then led the way to the power control room. Don't you want to go back and rest? You tell me where it is. I will go by myself. Looking at the woman in front of him, Jiang Hai immediately stretched out his hand, stopped her movement, and then said to her, he always felt a little nervous following a lunatic. It doesn't matter. Anyway, I will go back to watch TV. But now there is no power. I can't watch TV. I will accompany you. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the woman turned back and smiled, then strode forward. Hearing her say this, Jiang Hai felt that this woman should not be very crazy. If she was like those on the second floor, Jiang Hai would be miserable, but he really didn't know the distribution of the basement, so he could only bite the bullet and follow the woman to the power control room. As they walked, the woman also introduced the basement to Jiang Hai intentionally or unintentionally. Although this is a basement, the place here is not small. There are two large areas. One is the residential area, and the other is the research area. We are now in the residential area. There are some living places here. There's a power room, an underground warehouse, a data room, a file room, a water pipe, and so on. The other side is the research institute. Looking at Jiang Hai, the woman said loudly as she walked. Hearing the woman's words, Jiang Hai also quickly imagined the situation of this place in his mind. From time to time, he would also ask the woman where these rooms were. Although the power supply room was also a very important place, in order to facilitate repairs, it was turned on after the power was cut off. After Jiang Hai learned this news, he breathed a sigh of relief. But just as they were about to walk to the power supply room, suddenly Jiang Hai smelled a bloody smell drifting over. As soon as he smelled the bloody smell, Jiang Hai reacted immediately. He grabbed the woman who was still walking forward in front of him and looked back. There was nothing nearby, not even a ventilation pipe. There was only a shabby changing closet standing in the distance. Immediately, Jiang Hai directly hugged the woman and quickly came to the front of the closet. After opening the closet, Jiang Hai found that it was empty. After Jiang Hai stuffed the woman in first, he also flashed in. Under the woman's puzzled gaze, he covered her mouth and gestured for her to keep quiet. And just as Jiang Hai locked the iron door from the inside, there was a burst of chaotic footsteps in the distance. Chapter 884. There was a sound here just now. Let's look for it. Just as Jiang Hai and the woman hid in the cabinet, a burst of messy footsteps came quickly from afar. Under Jiang Hai's gaze, several strong men appeared at the entrance of the passage. Each of these strong men was like the guy Jiang Hai dealt with on the second floor. They were more than 2 meters tall and had a lot of fat on their bodies. The guard uniform on their bodies was also in strips. However, some of these guys' mouths were sewn, while some were not. What made Jiang Hai feel even more terrified was that each of these people was holding 1 or 2 people. They should be people. Under Jiang Hai's gaze, the guy walking on the ground with both hands and feet should be a person without a doubt. However, these guys seem to have been skinned. There's almost no skin on their bodies, and even the muscles could be seen. They had no hair and no eyelids. Their 2 eyes protruded out and were still moving, which meant that these guys were alive. They were squatting there and looking around. When they heard the words of the leader, these people also scattered to look around. However, these mental patients seemed to have suffered some damage to their intelligence, so they were not very smart. Jiang Hai was ready to kill them here, but they did not look at this rather obvious cabinet. Instead, they looked around and gave up. Seeing everyone return, the man also left while cursing. After confirming that the people outside had left, Jiang Hai also let out a sigh of relief. This place was really too strange. These guys did not look like ordinary mental patients. If the guy on the second floor was an accident, then why were there so many of these guys now? It was impossible to lock up so many strong and fat guys here. Also, why did they sew their mouths? Also, what was that monster-like person? An N. After confirming that these people had left, the woman in front of him also called out twice and then patted Jiang Hai's hand. Jiang Hai felt her movement and let go of her hand. Then, he found that his and the girl's posture seemed a bit strange. Because this iron cabinet was really too small, it was already very crowded when Jiang Hai squeezed in, not to mention another person squeezing in. At this moment, this girl and Jiang Hai could be said to be completely and perfectly stuck together. If there really was a zero distance, this would be it. The most important thing was that this girl was still dressed in red. Jiang Hai couldn't help but feel a little awkward. "Sorry, I'll go out now," Jiang Hai said to the girl, and wanted to walk out, but the girl stopped him. "No need. I'm quite comfortable with you like this." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the girl giggled and took the initiative to wrap her arms around Jiang Hai's waist. She leaned against Jiang Hai's chest and closed her eyes to listen to Jiang Hai's heartbeat. Just as Jiang Hai felt a little awkward and wanted to move, the girl spoke. "Do you have a grudge against Patrick Charles?" Raising her head and looking at Jiang Hai, the girl asked strangely, "Patrick Charles? That person just now?" Hearing the girl's words, Jiang Hai asked her with some confusion, "That person just now? This guy is one of the fiercest guys here. He only listens to Dafur." Hearing Jiang Hai's question, the girl smiled and said, wrinkling her cute nose at the same time, "Dafur." Hearing another person's name, Jiang Hai was even more confused. Dafur, he's our boss here. We all have to listen to him, but he's really smart. He solved the problem of injections and medicine for us. We don't have to take those bitter medicine and don't have to take those painful injections. It's really the happiest thing. The most important thing is that after taking those injections, you'll forget some things. I don't remember anything now except that I'm called Lois Knightley." Hearing Jiang Hai's question, the girl shrugged and didn't care that her chest was constantly rubbing against Jiang Hai's chest. She told Jiang Hai about the situation here. What's his full name? Looking at Lois Knightley in front of him, Jiang Hai finally understood that the person named Doffer should be the leader here. He saw the beginning of this incident. Doflamingo Campbell is a very thin and weak guy, but he has a very strong heart. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Lois Knightley also said with a smile. Hearing this name, Jiang Hai recalled for a moment. He was sure that he didn't know him. Forget it. This has nothing to do with me. I just want to find a power supply and pull the switch. Shaking his head, Jiang Hai is not a savior, and he has no interest in being a savior. What will happen to this place in the future has nothing to do with Jiang Hai. Why this person became like this has nothing to do with Jiang Hai. Although he is a little curious, Jiang Hai's sixth sense tells him that it may be related to this research institute, but this has nothing to do with Jiang Hai. At most, it's the police's business after he goes out. The power supply room is nearby. You can see it after turning left in front. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Lois Knightley also said with a smile. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also reopened the door. After confirming that there was no one outside, he forced himself out of the small cabinet and pulled Lois Knightley out. I'll walk the rest of the way by myself. It's too dangerous to follow me. After seeing Lois Knightley come out, Jiang Hai also said to her, indeed, if he encounters any danger, it's much easier for him to handle it alone. Whether it's to fight or hide, he has enough ability. But if he also brings Lois Knightley, Jiang Hai will be somewhat restrained. That won't do. I brought you here. If you do anything bad here, it will be troublesome, so I have to keep an eye on you. But he didn't expect that, after Jiang Hai finished speaking, Louisa and Knightley didn't leave and said with a serious face, "Ugh." Hearing her words and looking at her firm eyes, Jiang Hai smiled helplessly, then shook his head and walked away. Fortunately, those people didn't stay here for long. There was no one on the path in the distance. Only the red light in front of the power supply room's door was still on, indicating that it was in a state of power outage. After confirming the target, Jiang Hai crept toward the power supply room. Lois Knightley also followed Jiang Hai. Fortunately, this girl even took off her high heels because it was hot in the elevator. She walked silently, so Jiang Hai let her follow him. Not long after, the two arrived in front of the power supply room. Jiang Hai quietly opened the door and took a look inside. It was dark, and there was nothing else. He had to admit that such an atmosphere was indeed quite creepy. Jiang Hai took a deep breath, then walked in slowly. He crept down and found the position of the turned-off machine that he saw in the surveillance room on the second floor. This machine was still operating at this time, but there were 3 English sentences written on the LCD panel, and they were all red. What does this mean? Looking at the panel in front of him, Jiang Hai was even more confused. He didn't know anything about electricity. This is the switchboard here. He told you that there are a total of 3 gates here, but now these 3 gates are all closed. You have to open these 3 gates first before you can start this machine. At this time, Lois Knightley, who had been following Jiang Hai, came over and looked at the machine in front of her. She said to Jiang Hai, "How do you know?" Looking at Lois Knightley beside him, Jiang Hai was very sure that he knew every word on it when they were separated, but he didn't know when they were put together. This was definitely a professional term. How did Lois Knightley know? Who knows? I understand it at a glance. However, after listening to Jiang Hai's words, Lois Knightley shrugged, indicating that she didn't quite understand. Looking at her, Jiang Hai felt that he might really not be able to get anything out of her. Now it was more important to start the power supply. Fortunately, the positions of these 3 gates were also marked on the night LCD panel. Although it was dark, Jiang Hai still went to the first gate in the dark. Soon, Jiang Hai found a gate on the wall. As Jiang Hai pulled the wrench hard, a click came for the power supply room. Then, the middle of the 3 red Peugeot lit up. Seeing that it was useful, Jiang Hai touched the second mark. This was a gate that turned like a steering wheel. Jiang Hai twisted it hard. As Jiang Hai twisted it, there was a sound of water. Then, with a click, the first light came on. There was only the last one left. It was a little far away, so Jiang Hai walked over. This was a very simple switch like the main switch in a house. It was also the easiest to pull. Jiang Hai pulled it down casually. Just as the switch was pulled down, the sound of the motor working again came from the power supply room. After the sound of rotation, the lights in the power supply room lit up first. As the lights flashed a few times, Jiang Hai instantly returned to the kingdom of light. The lights in the power supply room were so bright that they could be seen at all. Because Jiang Hai wasn't prepared, he had been staying in the dark. Suddenly, his eyes lit up, and he felt pain in his eyes. Then, tears filled his eyes. He couldn't see anything clearly, but Jiang Hai wasn't in a hurry because he knew that this was temporary. But at this moment, suddenly, a gust of wind came from afar. It directly smashed towards Jiang Hai. Chapter 885. Who the F*** CK? Feeling the wind, Jiang Hai naturally couldn't take it head-on. He instantly jumped back and dodged away. At the same time, he closed his eyes and wiped his tears with his clothes. When he opened his eyes again, he found that the one who spoke in the iron cabinet was not Patrick Campbell. He was standing in front of him with a ferocious and excited look. At the same time, the door of the power supply room was opened. Patrick Campbell's men were rushing in with those human-like creatures. Lois Knightley was also stunned and didn't know what to do. After those people came in, she just stood there with her hands raised high. Doffer was right. Your target is here. He was holding a metal bat in his hand. It seems like this was the thing that attacked Jiang Hai just now. Patrick Campbell said to Jiang Hai with a voice that sounded like he had a mouthful of old phlegm stuck in his throat. Jiang Hai could see a trace of madness in his eyes. Hey, Patrick, what are you doing? Lois Knightley shouted in dissatisfaction when she saw Patrick Campbell attacking Jiang Hai. In her opinion, it was good enough to play a prank. She didn't have the thought of using force. In her opinion, being hit by that kind of bat was a very serious matter. Shut up. I haven't even asked you what's going on with this infiltrator, and you still have the nerve to call me that. Hearing Lois Knightley's words, Patrick Campbell roared furiously. Hearing his words, Lois Knightley couldn't help but smack her lips. This woman also knew that she had to survive. Now was obviously not the time to argue with him. Seeing Lois Knightley become silent, Patrick Campbell couldn't help but click his tongue. In their eyes, women were failures. They were not smart, they were not strong, they were not brave, they were not brave. At least in the eyes of Patrick Campbell and the others, women were useless. After he finished scolding Lois Knightley, he turned to deal with Jiang Hai. But when he turned his head, he found that Jiang Hai had already appeared in front of him. He could see the sole of Jiang Hai's shoe that directly split the ground. Clang! Jiang Hai's kick instantly sent Patrick Campbell flying for more than a meter before he fell heavily to the ground. When he landed, all his teeth fell out and his eyes rolled back unconsciously. It was obvious that he had lost consciousness. Seeing this, Jiang Hai wanted to get rid of this guy without hesitation. But at that moment, the people who had been silent since they came and let go of the reins in their hands. The creatures that looked like humans and dogs roared and rushed forward. But humans weren't dogs after all. Humans didn't have sharp claws or teeth. Besides, these guys were still in the category of normal people. How could Jiang Hai be afraid of them? He used his foot to pick up the baseball bat that Patrick Campbell dropped when he landed. Jiang Hai went up and swung the bat without hesitation. The bat hit one of the men's head. With a puff sound, the man's head was directly smashed by Jiang Hai. Although it didn't completely burst open like a watermelon, it still smashed a big hole. Brain matter and blood splattered everywhere, but this didn't deter the other people. They still rushed over quickly and rushed towards Jiang Hai. Be careful, they carry the virus. If you get bitten, you'll be in trouble. Just as Jiang Hai decided to kill them, Louisa Knightley also shouted. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai restrained himself a little. In an instant, he swung the bat and sent one flying. He used the bat to knock down a few that pounced on him from behind. Then, he kicked one of the remaining ones and rushed to the door. At the door, Patrick Campbell's men saw Jiang Hai rushing over and immediately blocked in front of Jiang Hai. But Jiang Hai didn't care about that. He kicked a big man in the mouth. This time, Jiang Hai didn't hold back. Originally, this kick was absolutely not a problem to kill a person, but the problem was that this guy had too much fat on his body, which reduced the impact by a lot. But even so, he still flew backward and knocked down a few of his companions behind him. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Jiang Hai also pulled Louisa Knightley, who was still in a daze beside him, and directly escaped from the power supply room. When those skinless guys who were knocked down over their counterattacked, Jiang Hai had already locked the door of the power supply room again. Now that there was electricity, the magnetic lock could be used. Jiang Hai locked the door and prevented these guys from going out. Oh no, the switch is still inside. If they pull the switch, it will be troublesome. Just as he was about to run, Jiang Hai suddenly remembered something and said with some annoyance. It seemed that he took things for granted. These people can't be left alive. It doesn't matter. After the switch is pushed up, the switchboard will take over. If you don't have the password to pull the switch, you will be shocked. Seeing Jiang Hai about to go back, Louisa Knightley immediately said to Jiang Hai, "There is such a setting." Hearing her words, Jiang Hai looked at her with some doubt. Then, he didn't care about that anymore and just treated it as if she was telling the truth. Then, Jiang Hai ran towards the reference room, but after taking 2 steps, he realized that Louisa Knightley was too slow. So, without saying a word, Jiang Hai directly carried her and rushed towards the reference room. Louisa Knightley knew how fast Jiang Hai was anyway. She just felt that they had already arrived in front of the reference room in less than a minute, which originally took them about 10 minutes to walk here. Using the guard card as pocket, Jiang Hai opened the door of the reference room. Then he walked in. Fortunately, these people didn't care much about the reference room. Perhaps no one had ever entered it before. At this time, it was still neat and tidy. Phew, are we here? Too fast. After putting Louisa Knightley on the ground, Jiang Hai walked inside. The information here was written according to the year. Jiang Hai remembered that Bruce David was arrested last year, so he just needed to find the documents of last year and this year. Walking to the back of the shelf, Jiang Hai soon found the information about the prisoners who were detained last year. This guy was really a ruthless person, and he didn't seem to be a real psychopath because he used to be a criminal and had more than 100 cases in his hands. Because he was the person in charge of a district, it was impossible to let him die. So the big boss asked someone to prove that he was a psychopath and then try to find a way to get him out of the mental hospital. But he didn't expect that the new official wanted to mess with him, so he threw him directly into the mental hospital. Jiang Hai looked at the guy in front of him. To be honest, he was quite ugly. A white man with a mouth full of yellow teeth and a mohawk. It was hard to imagine how he had become like this after just a year of being in there. Jiang Hai looked at the previous appearance of the guy in front of him. To be honest, he was quite ugly. A white man with a mouth full of yellow teeth and a mohawk. It was hard to imagine how he had become like this in just over a year. Shaking his head, Jiang Hai didn't have much interest in understanding things that he didn't understand. He continued to flip, and soon he found Bruce David. In the photo, Jiang Hai could see that this was a very ordinary old man. He was about 1.75 meters tall, a little thin, 62 years old, balding with some hair on both sides. He looked very old. According to the information, when he was young, he was in the Navy, retired at the age of 37, and opened a bar. Last year, someone found people's broken limbs in the trash he threw away, so they called the police. When the police caught him, he was eating people at home. Although it was certain that he was crazy, this matter was too bad. So after he was caught last year, the police sent him here, and he stayed for more than a year. Now, Jiang Hai was looking for him. However, just as Jiang Hai was about to pull out this information and leave the rest, he found that behind Bruce David's name was Lois Knightley's information. It said that Lois Knightley was born in 1992. She was still very young. She was a stage actress and model. Not just a young model, but she had walked in a big show. The year before last, she had also endorsed an unknown international brand. The reason why she came in was that she was charged with arson and murder. When the police caught her, she was already crazy. Originally, people like her were not qualified to be here, but the rich man used his connections and threw her here. Looking at this simple information, Jiang Hai frowned. He felt that something was wrong. Just as he was puzzled, he didn't realize that Lois Knightley had walked to his side. Well, I didn't expect my photo to be so good. Looking at the information in Jiang Hai's hand in front of her, Lois Knightley couldn't help laughing. But before she finished speaking, the magnetic electronic door on the other side had beeped twice. When Jiang Hai saw this scene, he couldn't help but immediately squat down and hide in a distant corner, watching the group of people who came in. Among these people, Jiang Hai still had an impression of one of them. It was a guy who had just turned off the engine. Chapter 886. Look for him. The person who turned off the power switch said with a gloomy face as he walked into the reference room. As his voice fell, the people who came in with him scattered, looking for Jiang Hai's traces. Jiang Hai glanced at them. It was not difficult to escape, but the woman beside him sighed, troublesome. Since there was no way to break in, he had to find a way to hide. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai pulled Lois Knightley up and slowly walked to the dark corner. When Jiang Hai came in, he had already seen this place. There were many large cardboard boxes here. It was a good place to hide. While these people were not paying attention, Jiang Hai quietly piled up a few boxes in the corner. Then he and Lois Knightley hid in it, holding her head to prevent her from suddenly jumping up. Jiang Hai looked at these people in front of him through the gap of the cardboard boxes. Just as Jiang Hai thought, these guys were not smart enough. They searched in circles and would not destroy the shelves here. This also made Jiang Hai relieved. Just as he relaxed a little, he suddenly felt that a certain indescribable part of him was exposed to the air. He looked down and found that it was Lois Knightley who was fiddling with it. Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai almost shouted, but Lois Knightley raised her head and made a shushing gesture to Jiang Hai. Seeing her gesture, Jiang Hai could not make a sound. He could only ask her with his eyes, "What is she doing?" But Lois Knightley did not answer Jiang Hai. Instead, she lowered her head and put something indescribable into her mouth. Although her movements were very unfamiliar, with this exciting scene, Jiang Hai also felt that his brain was empty. But the current situation did not allow him to empty his mind. He could only endure the feeling from that side while observing the situation outside. No. After searching for about 5 minutes, a big man walked in front of the commander and said in a muffled voice. When the commander heard the big man's words, he pushed the big man away. His eagle-like eyes scanned the room, but he couldn't find Jiang Hai's whereabouts. "I know you're here, outsider. Let me introduce myself. I'm Dofer, Doflamingo Campbell. I don't know why you're here, but for my own sake, for the sake of these people here, you're doomed to die. Come out now. I will give you a chance to become one of us. If I catch you, haha, I will make you wish you were dead." Doflamingo Campbell shouted towards the reference room in front of him. Listening to his words, Jiang Hai could not help but curl his lips in disdain. This guy is really shameless. What's wrong with him? Why did he come here to be a lunatic instead of a normal person? Jiang Hai wasn't crazy to this extent. Seeing that no one answered him, Doflamingo Campbell shook his neck, waved his hand, and walked out of the reference room. His subordinates also followed him out. Seeing them leave, Jiang Hai also let out a sigh of relief. After confirming that they had left, Jiang Hai looked at Lois Knightley, who was still working hard. "Hey, they've already left. What are you doing, hiss?" Looking at Lois Knightley, Jiang Hai whispered. However, after hearing Jiang Hai's words, Lois Knightley sped up. Jiang Hai felt the impact and stimulation just now. Unable to bear it, he relaxed his demands on himself. At this moment, Lois Knightley also stopped. After receiving all the gifts, she slowly raised her head and swallowed something. After cleaning up the places that Jiang Hai could not describe, she put it back where it should be. "Phew, you're too crazy. How could you do that at this moment?" Looking at Lois Knightley in front of him, Jiang Hai complained. Hearing his words, Lois Knightley raised her head with a smile. "I have no choice. If I don't do this, I'm afraid that you won't treat me as your own." Hearing what Jiang Hai said, Lois Knightley said with a smile. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai smiled bitterly. You're actually not crazy at all, are you? Looking at Lois Knightley in front of him, Jiang Hai summarized her situation along the way. Although she looked a little crazy, Jiang Hai's sixth sense kept telling him that she was not crazy. That depends on what you think. Even a normal person who is locked up here will go crazy. Shrugging, Lois Knightley said briskly. She didn't care what Jiang Hai said about her. What do you mean? Hearing her words, Jiang Hai looked at her with some confusion. The drugs here all have a nerve-suppressive effect. In other words, it's quite harmful to the human brain. After people take it, they will forget the past. Not only memories, but even eating, sleeping, going to the toilet, and speaking will be forgotten. Those who have lived in the mental hospital for more than 10 years are basically in the same situation. There are also many such people here. They have forgotten language, forgotten themselves, no anger, no happiness, no sadness, no humanity. Looking at Jiang Hai, Lois Knightley gently tucked her hair behind her ear and said sadly, Since you're not crazy, why did you come in? Looking at Lois Knightley's clear eyes, Jiang Hai was very sure that she was really not crazy. But if she was not crazy, why did she come in? Haven't you read my information? If I don't come in, I'll die. Compared to dying outside, it's better to come in and live for 10 more years, isn't it? Looking at Jiang Hai, Lois Knightley said with a relaxed smile, Let's talk about you. After hesitating for a moment, Jiang Hai originally didn't want to complicate matters, but it was fate that brought them together. Jiang Hai was too embarrassed to just leave when the time came. Under reasonable and legal circumstances, he was still willing to help this woman. As you know, my name is Lois Knightley. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Lois Knightley slowly spoke. After all, she had been receiving treatment for a year. During this time, she had forgotten a lot of things, such as the brand she used to endorse, the advertising slogans, and even what she used to do. She was a little vague, but how she came in, she always remembered. According to her, she used to have a boyfriend, and the two of them had a good relationship. But a rich second generation took a fancy to her. She had to say that this world was far more melodramatic than she imagined. The rich second generation took a fancy to her and wanted to sleep with her, but she didn't agree. And this rich second generation was a pervert. He only liked to play with willing women. If the woman didn't want to, he wouldn't give up. He would force the woman to be willing. So he caught her boyfriend and used him to threaten her. But who knew that her boyfriend had practiced before? After breaking the rope, he beat up the rich second generation and then took Lois Knightley to escape from the warehouse. But at the critical moment, the rich second generation's bodyguards appeared and shot Lois Knightley's boyfriend to death. Seeing her boyfriend die tragically, Lois Knightley was indeed a little crazy at that time. At this time, Lois Knightley had already run out of the abandoned warehouse, and her boyfriend used the last of his strength to close the door of the warehouse. Coincidentally, there were a few barrels of unused diesel near the door of the warehouse. Then her boyfriend ignited them with a lighter, and the whole warehouse burned. Her boyfriend's bones were not left, and the rich second generation also died tragically in the fire. When the police and the fire brigade came, only Lois Knightley was here. At that time, she was indeed a little crazy. After being taken away, the rich second generation's father was extremely sad. He didn't agree that the murderer was dead. According to him, he wanted Lois Knightley to be buried with his son. So he listed the charges, found the best lawyer, and convicted Lois Knightley of murder and arson. The United States also had the death penalty. It was not as rumored that there was no death penalty. The United States once abolished the death penalty in 1967, but then the crime rate was high. So in 1976, the United States restored the death penalty again. At present, 33 states in the United States had the death penalty. Just like the brother of the protagonist in the TV series Prison Break, he would be sentenced to death. But basically, the sentencing standard of the death penalty was very high. Only major crimes, such as smuggling, kidnapping, bank robbery, rape, child molestation, and other major crimes, such as intentional murder, would be sentenced to death. But this was obviously not a problem for the rich. If they said that Lois Knightley had committed murder and arson, then she had committed murder and arson. This was the privilege of the rich in the United States. However, the police were not stupid. After they knew that they could not do anything to the rich businessman, they told Louisa Knightley to pretend to be crazy. That way, there might be a chance to reverse the case in the future. Otherwise, she could only die. So she began to pretend to be crazy. But after the rich businessman knew about this, he was very angry. He used the power at hand to get her here. He wanted her to suffer a fate worse than death. After listening to Lois Knightley's words, Jiang Hai was a little angry at first, but then he thought that he seemed to be at the level of this rich businessman, so he didn't say anything. But although he was at the same level, it didn't mean that he wouldn't stand up for Lois Knightley. This woman had suffered a lot. Since Jiang Hai wanted to hide, as long as he went out, Moses Adams would probably have something to do again. Chapter 887. Why do I feel a little hot? Just as Jiang Hai and Louisa Knightley were talking to each other, Louisa and Knightley suddenly said with some doubts. Upon hearing her words, Jiang Hai was stunned. Huh, she's already naked. What's there to feel hot about? Just as Jiang Hai was about to scold her for being mischievous, Jiang Hai suddenly felt a little hot, and there was a burnt smell. Looking back, he didn't know when it started, but the reference room was already on fire. Although the fire wasn't big, Jiang Hai was still startled when he saw it. He instantly carried Louisa Knightley beside him and rushed out. Fire was indeed a powerful thing, but as long as one didn't stand in the fire for a long time, it was still possible to rush out directly. Jiang Hai had enough speed and strength. After carrying Louisa Knightley, Jiang Hai rushed out of the reference room in a flash. But when he rushed out, he found Doflamingo Campbell standing outside the reference room. Beside him were many fat guards and human-like creatures. Finally can't hold it in anymore? Hee, you guys are really naive. You think I won't know if you hide in there? Why can't you hide anymore? In fact, it's fine if you hide for a while longer because this room has an automatic fire extinguishing function. When the temperature in the room reaches 50 degrees, it will automatically extinguish the fire. Looking at Jiang Hai in front of him, the man said with a sly smile. At this time, Jiang Hai also put down Isis Knightley. At the same time, he took off his clothes and put them on her body. He didn't want this woman to be seen by others. It didn't matter before, but now it's not okay. At the same time, he also turned his head and carefully looked at the man in front of him for the first time. This man didn't look short, about 1.95 meters, which was not much different from himself. He was a very typical American white man, with short blonde hair sticking close to his scalp and a sharp and mean face. Although he was wearing a guard's uniform, he didn't wear ordinary leather shoes on his feet. Instead, he wore a pair of pointed leather shoes that only old ladies would wear. He stood in front of Jiang Hai with his legs apart and a smile on his face that made Jiang Hai feel disgusted. Phew, I don't want to have a conflict with you, but it doesn't mean that I don't dare to. If you continue to pretend that I don't exist, I will leave after I find the person I'm looking for. Looking at Doflamingo Campbell in front of him, Jiang Hai narrowed his eyes and said with an unfriendly expression. He was just running away from a fight, but it didn't mean that he wouldn't fight. This guy was really courting death by forcing him like this. Then you go out, find the police, and let the police deal with us? Ha. You really have a good plan. Instead of letting you go out, it's better to let you stay here forever. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the man directly interrupted Jiang Hai's words and then said to Jiang Hai with a crazy face, "It seems that you are really crazy." Looking at this guy, Jiang Hai narrowed his eyes and was ready to attack. It's not that I'm crazy, it's the world that's crazy. Ha. But then again, who are you looking for? After I assimilate you, maybe I will let you meet him. Looking at Jiang Hai, Doflamingo Campbell said with a smirk on his face, "Bruce David, do you know him?" Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai had to ask him. Of course I know him. He is now making the best use of everything. As soon as Jiang Hai's voice fell, Doflamingo Campbell touched his chin and said with a look of approval, "It seems that he really knows where Bruce David is. Since you know, that's great, as long as I catch you. It should be enough." Hearing Doflamingo Campbell's words, Jiang Hai also smiled softly. The next second, he took a step and rushed towards Doflamingo Campbell in front of him in an instant. But he had to admit that this guy had been prepared for Jiang Hai's trick. At the moment when Jiang Hai rushed over, he also retreated quickly, and those big men rushed towards Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai had to change his attack direction halfway. Now he didn't hold back at all. He went up and kicked one of the big men in the face. At the same time, he used the force to turn in the air and avoided the attack of another big man. Then, he whipped the other big man in the face. After the big man spun about 1,800 degrees in the air, he fell heavily to the ground. Seeing Jiang Hai deal with two people so quickly, ordinary people might be scared. But these people weren't ordinary people. Just like what Lois Knightley said, these guys couldn't be called human anymore because they didn't have human emotions. Although two of them were knocked down, the others still rushed over. Jiang Hai did not hold back. After landing, he kicked down one of the big men and dodged another one. Then he bounced off the ground and flew up in an instant. He pressed the head of the person who attacked him from behind and directly hit his face with his knee. The huge impact, along with his teeth, sent him flying. After Jiang Hai landed, he turned his body, jumped up again, and hit the head of a big man with his elbow. Pull the electricity. Seeing that 4 of the 6 macho men on his side were crippled in the blink of an eye, Doflamingo Campbell, who originally ran out of the battle circle, turned around and ran. At the same time, he roared loudly into the walkie-talkie. As his voice fell, the lights in the entire basement turned black again, but this could not stop Jiang Hai's attack. In fact, his goal was not just to use darkness to stop Jiang Hai. He had to admit that this guy was a genius. Seeing that Doflamingo Campbell was about to run, Jiang Hai also sped up his movements. In less than a few seconds, he defeated the remaining 2 people. Just as he was about to chase after Doflamingo, he was stopped by Lois Knightley. "What's wrong?" Looking at the anxious woman beside him, Jiang Hai asked her with some doubts. "Fire, fire." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Lois Knightley couldn't help but point to the reference room. Yes, it was on fire. Just like what she said just now, Doflamingo Campbell was a genius. He knew that with Jiang Hai's speed and strength, if he ran away directly, he would be dead. But if there was a fire here, would Jiang Hai save him? There was no electricity at this time, and there was no way to put out the fire. If Jiang Hai did not put out the fire and chased after him, the fire would get bigger. This was the basement, and there was no passage leading to the first floor. The legendary passage leading to the outside must be locked now. If Jiang Hai did not put out the fire, he might be burned alive. Of course, he would die too, but he wanted to die together with Jiang Hai. This person did not know that Jiang Hai could climb out of the elevator. However, Jiang Hai did not want this place to catch fire after he climbed out. There was no signal now, and he would not be able to explain himself no matter how many mouths he had. Therefore, even if Jiang Hai did not want to, he had to save this fire. Damn it! After cursing, Jiang Hai saw the fire hose in the distance. After opening it, he took out the fire extinguisher from it. After unplugging the switch, Jiang Hai rushed into the reference room. The fire was extinguished for almost 3 minutes. In this time, who knows where the guy went? When there was only some fire ash left in the reference room, Jiang Hai also came out with a fire hose. This guy is really ruthless. This is troublesome. How do we catch this guy? Muttering in a low voice, Jiang Hai said helplessly. Doflamingo Campbell must have gone to the laboratory. He's been living there for the past few days. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Lois Knightley also said seriously. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai also decided to catch this guy first. Let's go to the laboratory. Jiang Hai waved his hand and took Lois Knightley to the laboratory. But before going, they also went to the power supply room. There were still 3 big men there, but the second leader, Patrick Charles, was not there. Jiang Hai did not hold back this time. He directly killed one and injured 2 of the 3 guys. After all of them had no combat power, he threw them out of the power supply room and restarted the power supply. Then, Lois Knightley led the way and rushed to the laboratory. The underground here was really big and troublesome. After running for about 5 minutes, Jiang Hai ran to an isolated area. This was the laboratory, but before going in, Jiang Hai put Lois Knightley down. He had been carrying her all the way. Otherwise, with her speed, She was really too slow. I don't know what dangers we will encounter after going in. Don't come in. Go to the elevator and wait for me. Looking at Lois Knightley, Jiang Hai said to her seriously. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Lois Knightley also nodded seriously. She was not crazy. She knew that she would only be a burden to Jiang Hai here. Her job of guiding the way was over. She believed that Jiang Hai would come back to pick her up, so after watching Jiang Hai walk into the laboratory, she quickly ran to the elevator. Now she was an accomplice of Jiang Hai. If Jiang Hai won, it would be fine. If Jiang Hai lost, according to her estimation, she might appear in these guys' lunch tomorrow. This was not a joke, it was true. These crazy lunatics, you can't use reason, law, or humanity to restrain them because they don't have it at all. Chapter 888. With a sound, Jiang Hai walked towards the laboratory in front of him, and the door of the laboratory was opened. After opening it, what entered Jiang Hai's eyes was a pure white world. In Jiang Hai's eyes, almost the front part of the laboratory was completely white. The walls were white, the ground was white, the ceiling was white, even the tables and chairs in the room were white. The white light was swaying there, making it seem like the whole world was white. The only difference was the strong smell of blood in the room. Looking at the scene in front of him, Jiang Hai's vigilance reached the highest level. In his opinion, this should be the office of a laboratory because there were many desks here, almost 20 of them. It seemed that there were a lot of people in this laboratory before it was destroyed, but unfortunately, there was no one left. He slowly walked inside. After a few steps, he found that in the middle of 2 desks, there were a lot of broken limbs and a few heads, but in addition to these pieces, the main body had disappeared. Only dried blood was left on the ground. Jiang Hai frowned and slowly walked forward. After walking through the first area, Jiang Hai came to the second area. As Jiang Hai walked, the door opened again, allowing Jiang Hai to enter the second area. If the first area was the office area, then the second area should be the monitoring area. The second area was not big. It was about 100 square meters tall. In the middle of the hall, there was a hexagonal area. There were many chairs, one person facing one side, but at this time, there was nothing but a lot of blood. The computer was still on, and it was full of blood and other things. Jiang Hai glanced at the scene in front of him and unconsciously swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Although he was very sure that in this world, he was the only one who was different from the rest, but he still felt a little scared. Because the scene in front of him was similar to a scene in a movie, Jiang Hai was also very afraid that a zombie would suddenly appear and eat him. That would be embarrassing, although his consciousness told him that it was impossible. This monitoring room corresponded to 6 electronic sensors. In addition to the door of the laboratory that Jiang Hai just came in, there were 5 other doors. These 5 doors were respectively labeled as the observation room, the laboratory, the medicine room, the supply room, and the rest area. To be honest, Jiang Hai did not know where Doflamingo Campbell went, but it did not matter because he could check through the computer here. Don't forget, the computer here was also used for monitoring. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai walked to the hexagonal platform and was about to sit in front of the computer. Suddenly, Jiang Hai remembered Doflamingo Campbell's trick. He stopped and looked back. Sure enough, he found a needle on the chair here. It seemed that this guy was really strange. Jiang Hai thought that it might be a mistake not to close this place when he left, but now it seemed that this was a trap. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai did not sit on the chair, but directly squatted there. When he practiced martial arts with Bell and Qi Jie in the past, it was not that he did not have the horse stance. Now, it was not that he could not squat. Squatting in the horse stance, Jiang Hai began to check the current surveillance video. Sure enough, after the camera scanned, there was no one in the observation room, the medicine room, the supply room, and the rest area. Only the laboratory was occupied, but it was not very clear. But it did not matter, as long as he was sure that there was someone there. Walking to the door of the laboratory, Jiang Hai used his guard card to open the door of the laboratory, and then walked in. After walking into the laboratory, Jiang Hai found that the smell of blood here was even stronger. Many people were tied to the test bench in the distance at this time. Some had their stomachs cut open, and some had been dried. Jiang Hai did not know who these people were, but at this time, those who appeared here and died should not be patients. It could only be the original doctors, nurses, and researchers. Looking at this inhumane scene, Jiang Hai walked inside. After walking for about a few minutes, a person appeared in front of Jiang Hai. It was a person that Jiang Hai was very familiar with, Doflamingo Campbell. You must have been very shocked along the way. Looking at Jiang Hai, Doflamingo Campbell sat on a test bench and said to Jiang Hai with a smile on his face. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also stopped, then looked back at the patients from all directions at this time. Jiang Hai has also seen the types of these patients. Fat people more than 2 meters tall, people without skin all over their bodies. In an instant, Jiang Hai seemed to have fallen into the encirclement, but Jiang Hai did not care and looked at Doflamingo Campbell in front of him. But this is not shocking enough. For what they did to us, this is not enough. Aren't you curious about what experiments are done in the laboratory here? Looking at Jiang Hai's answer, Doflamingo Campbell shook his head and said to himself, I'm not interested in knowing. This time, Jiang Hai finally replied, but his words made Doflamingo Campbell curl his lips. Even if you're not interested, I have to tell you that this pharmaceutical company is actually a group of animals. They are experimenting on us. Looking at Jiang Hai in front of him, Doflamingo Campbell said angrily. Then he talked about the company's situation. Jiang Hai introduced this prison before. It is a company's welfare psychiatric hospital. It is specially used to detain those mentally ill prisoners, and they don't charge money for it. Some people will say, isn't this doing a good deed? How many people in the world do good deeds? Of course, some of the philanthropists in the world are really doing charity. No, more than 80% of them have a purpose. For example, Bill Gates and others. Do you really think they can just donate the money? Donations are tax deductible. Some things are 1% tax deductible, and some things are 1% tax deductible. In other words, if you donate 100 million, you can pay 150 million in income tax, which is very tempting. Of course, this company is not strong enough to lose money and make money. The reason why they build a hospital here is mainly because they want to do experiments here. Of course, the California government also knows about this, but no one will speak for these patients who have committed murder, so the darkness here will continue. Look at these people. Do you think they used to be like this? Don't be naive. These fat people used to be ordinary people. In order to test the effect of the weight loss medicine, they were forced to inject hormones into them. That's why they became like this. In order to prevent them from screaming during the experiment, they sewed their mouths shut. Those skinless people were made to test the medicine for skin diseases. Don't you think they should be killed? Looking at Jiang Hai, Doflamingo Campbell said, while looking at Jiang Hai, he thinks that the people here deserve to die. After hearing his words, Jiang Hai glanced at the people around him, then blinked. What does this have to do with me? I'm sorry. I don't care if you're really crazy or not. I'm not here to avenge them. What you said has nothing to do with me. I'm not a saint, so whether they die or not has nothing to do with me. Whether you die or not has nothing to do with me. No matter how much trouble they cause, they can't bring trouble to a privileged class like me. There is darkness in this world, but I don't want to be a sun to dispel the darkness. Looking at Doflamingo Campbell in front of him, Jiang Hai waved his hand and said indifferently, he is not cold-blooded, but in his opinion, this really has nothing to do with him. How can he have so much sense of justice? Well, your goal is to find Bruce David, right? I can tell you that he is now working in the kitchen in the hall on the first floor. He's the head chef. What we have been eating these days is the meat of the staff here. I'll tell you now, but the premise is that you have to be able to rush out. Looking at Jiang Hai, Doflamingo Campbell said with a crazy face. Although he was crazy, he was not stupid. He knew that talking to Jiang Hai was like playing the lute to a cow. This guy's silence towards others had reached its limit. He did not care about the lives of these people, including himself. So it was useless to say anything now. It was better to take action. This was the most important thing. As soon as his voice fell, Jiang Hai and those lunatics had already moved. This time, Jiang Hai would not be polite. now that he knew Bruce David's whereabouts, and he had already taken care of so many laboratories along the way. He did not care if he had to take care of more. After jumping up and dodging the first wave of people, Jiang Hai came to the front of the laboratory table in a few steps. The laboratory was actually the same as the operating room. There were also many machines here, and there were also iron rods hanging on them. These were used to hang medicine bags. Jiang Hai was going to take action now. Naturally, he could not break the iron rods with his bare hands. Then, he gave a head-on blow to a dermatological patient who had rushed over and sent him flying. Looking at his sunken head, it was obvious that he had lost his ability to fight. But these things did not matter, because no one would pay attention to him at this time. Jiang Hai, who had smashed him away, was like a tiger in a flock of sheep. He killed his way into the encirclement of these people. For a moment, people were really scattered in all directions. Chapter 889. Doflamingo Campbell knew that Jiang Hai was strong, but he didn't know that Jiang Hai was this strong. His physical fitness was 8 times the limit of an ordinary person's body. Plus, he had learned Bosho Jitsu before. If Jiang Hai was a rich man, he would be a killing machine on the battlefield. If he was placed on an ancient battlefield, he would be a match for 10,000 people. It could be said that even if Xiang Yu or Lu Bu were reborn, there would still be no match for Jiang Hai. This was the reality. At this time, in Jiang Hai's eyes, these experimental subjects were like clay chickens and pottery dogs. He could deal with them however he wanted. Under the scattering of the staff, half of the hands that surrounded him were instantly sent flying. In less than a minute, only a third of them were left standing. If this had happened to an ordinary person, they would have collapsed long ago. However, these people were crazy. There was no fear in their eyes. Therefore, even though they knew that Jiang Hai was strong, they still rushed forward and were beaten down by Jiang Hai. Doflamingo Campbell was also afraid when he saw how strong Jiang Hai was. He wanted to take advantage of the chaos to escape, but unfortunately, he was kicked back by Jiang Hai. If this guy went out now, who knew if he would cause more trouble for him? Jiang Hai didn't want any more accidents to happen. It was almost dawn. With this thought, Jiang Hai swung the stick even faster. In less than a minute, the remaining 1/3 of the test subjects followed in the footsteps of the people in front of them. They lay on the ground, unable to fight. Clang! Jiang Hai threw away the stick in his hand and looked at Doflamingo Campbell, who was still trying to crawl towards the door. He curled his lips and walked over. When Jiang Hai reached for him, the guy suddenly turned around and stabbed Jiang Hai with a needle in his hand. Jiang Hai didn't say anything and just kicked the guy's wrist. After breaking the guy's wrist, Jiang Hai pulled the guy's other hand and brought him to the test bench. Then, Jiang Hai directly pressed him there. Jiang Hai didn't say anything and just kicked the guy's wrist. "Kill me, kill me, kill me." Doflamingo Campbell kept shouting as he looked at Jiang Hai. However, Jiang Hai looked at him and didn't do anything. Instead, he patted his face. "I won't kill you. If I kill you, how will I explain what happened here? I have evidence here. I want to clear my name, so you just stay here and wait for the police to come." After Jiang Hai finished speaking, he tied all the belts on the test bench on Doflamingo Campbell's body. After he couldn't move at all, Jiang Hai walked straight out of the room. Ignoring Doflamingo Campbell's roar behind him, Jiang Hai breathed a sigh of relief. The problem here was finally solved. Next, he had to deal with Bruce David. After leaving the laboratory, Jiang Hai walked to the elevator. When he arrived at the elevator, he found that Lois Knightley was already there waiting for him. Jiang Hai saw that she didn't say much. After entering the elevator again, he went to the first floor. Perhaps because of the stop just now, there weren't many mental patients on the first floor, and they weren't aggressive. They were all pretending to be doctors and nurses. Moreover, with Lois Knightley, an acquaintance, leading the way, no one came to trouble Jiang Hai. The two soon arrived at the dining room, but there was no one in the dining room at this time. After Jiang Hai and Lois Knightley passed through the dining room, they entered the kitchen. But as soon as they entered, Jiang Hai felt his stomach churning. Fortunately, he didn't eat lunch or dinner, or he would have vomited when he came in. The entire kitchen was now covered in blood. In the corner of the kitchen, there were many heads. These people's heads were obviously cut off not long ago. They all died with their eyes wide open with disbelief and disbelief. Their severed limbs were placed in the kitchen at this time. In the middle of the kitchen, there was a white, bearded man standing there dismembering a woman. Looking at his familiar knife skills, Jiang Hai was sure that he had done this more than once. Jiang Hai could still bear it at this time, but after Lois Knightley walked in, she couldn't bear it anymore. Don't forget that she also ate the food made in the kitchen these days. She instantly leaned against the door frame and vomited. It was really disgusting. What are you two doing in here? The kitchen is important. Get out. Hearing Lois Knightley vomiting, the bearded man also raised his head. When he saw the white coat on Lois Knightley, he frowned and scolded loudly. You're Bruce, David? Looking at the person in front of him, he looked very similar to the photo and the information Jiang Hai found, so he couldn't help but ask him. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the man also raised his head. You're looking for me? Looking at Jiang Hai, Bruce David asked with some doubts. Hearing that he was Bruce David, Jiang Hai nodded, then took a few steps forward, kicked the man's knife away, and knocked him to the ground with a punch. In this situation, Jiang Hai couldn't ask him anything, so he pulled him out. After coming to the restaurant, Jiang Hai also closed the kitchen door. After there was no blood, no severed limbs, and no severed heads in front of him, Jiang Hai calmed down a little. He asked Lois Knightley to guard outside. Jiang Hai went to the sink next to the table and got a glass of water. This was originally for the staff to wash their hands after eating. Jiang Hai walked to Bruce David and poured the water on his head. The man woke up with a splash of water. What are you doing, you bastard? I'm going to eat you. As soon as he opened his eyes, Bruce David screamed loudly, but unfortunately, Jiang Hai didn't give him the opportunity to do so. He directly stepped on Bruce's mouth, kicking him so hard that he almost couldn't breathe. His face turned purple from suffocation. What are you doing? I'm just a chef. Although Bruce David used to be a soldier, after so many years of life, he had already worn away his military instincts. Now that he saw that Jiang Hai wasn't so easy to talk to, and he might not be able to beat him, he decisively admitted defeat and said helplessly to Jiang Hai, I have a question to ask you. As long as you answer it properly, I will let you go. Looking at Bruce David in front of him, Jiang Hai took a deep breath and then said to him seriously. Hearing that Jiang Hai just has a question to ask him, Bruce David nodded immediately, indicating that he understood. Looking at his cowardice, it saved Jiang Hai a lot of trouble. Let me ask you, where did you see this badge? And the story of this thing, tell me from the beginning. Seeing that he was so cooperative, Jiang Hai didn't say much. He directly took out a piece of paper from his pocket, then pointed to the dragon-shaped badge on it and asked, This thing, how do you have this thing? Looking at this piece of paper, a trace of panic flashed in Bruce David's eyes. Then he asked Jiang Hai in a low voice. In his opinion, this thing is really not simple. You have already published it. How do I know? Don't talk nonsense, just tell me. After glaring at Bruce David, Jiang Hai said to him. Hearing Jiang Hai's roar, Bruce David also raised his hand and then began to speak. The story starts in 1938. At that time, a German scientific research ship went to the South Pole, but at that time, no one cared. After all, the powerful countries would go to the South Pole for scientific research at that time. However, in 1945, when Germany was defeated, the Allies only found a charred corpse. At the same time, they discovered that many people in Germany had disappeared. No one knew if they died in the war, but the leader at the time, the Americans, felt that something was wrong. So in 1946, they went to the South Pole, nominally for scientific research, but in fact, they went to the South Pole to find the secret base of the Germans. After they went there, 3 of them died, and they didn't understand the scientific research, so they came back. Bruce David was on the ship at that time, but he was not an official crew member. After all, he was 18 years old, and that was 70 years ago. Now, he's 88 years old. In fact, Bruce David was only 5 years old. The reason why he went there was because his father was one of the commanders at that time. According to his memories and his father's memories, he knew some things. For example, they really found the German base. It was a plane that landed on a snowy mountain. 3 people died, and 6 people survived. It was these 6 people who found the base, and this badge was printed in the German base. But when the large force entered the base, they found that there was no one in the base. Not many people knew about this. Among them, the Minister of the Navy, Forrestal, suddenly went crazy in 1949 and then committed suicide in a mental hospital. What he said when he went crazy was that there was actually Aryan City under the South Pole. Listening to Bruce David's words, Jiang Hai also fell into contemplation. His consciousness told him that this was nonsense, but he knew about the dragon-shaped badge. If he didn't look at it, he would feel that he was not very transparent. Young man, I advise you not to try to go there easily, because it is really terrible. If you're not careful, you can really die there. And if you want to go, it is best to prepare now. In the South Pole, you can only survive outside in December, January, and February every year. Other than these 3 months, the South Pole is a forbidden area. Looking at Jiang Hai's hesitant eyes, Bruce David also said with a smile, "It seems that he still remembers the South Pole." Chapter 890. Okay, you sit in the car and don't move. I'll call the police. Looking at Lois Knightley sitting in the passenger seat, Jiang Hai said seriously. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Lois Knightley also nodded, then put on Jiang Hai's coat, put on the hood, and laid down on the chair. Seeing that Lois Knightley was ready, Jiang Hai also pulled out the car key, got out of the car, and walked to the police station in front of him. After asking Bruce David about the dragon-shaped badge, Jiang Hai took Lois Knightley out of the asylum. After getting into his car, Jiang Hai rushed down the mountain. Of course, after getting a signal, he first called Qi Jie and the others who had been very anxious at home, telling them that he was safe and asking them to call Moses Adams to come over immediately. Also, it was estimated that their plan to enter the mountain would have to be pushed back a little because this was not a small matter. Then he drove directly to the town, not far away. Outside the town's police station, Jiang Hai also parked the car. After talking to Lois Knightley, he walked into the police station. "Hello, what's the matter?" Seeing Jiang Hai walk into the police station, the police officer on duty at night also sat up and looked at Jiang Hai with some doubts. It was almost 5:00 at this time, which meant that the sky was already bright. Jiang Hai had seen the sun at 4:00 in Los Angeles, but this police officer was quite sleepy. There were only more than 500 people in this town, and no one would come to the police station at night. At least this was the first time he encountered it when he was on duty. "Hello, my name is Jiang Hai. I have a manor in Winthrop. You should be able to find information about me on the internet. What I'm going to say next, you have to immediately report to the state police." Jiang Hai looked at the sleepy young man and said with a serious face. Hearing Jiang Hai's serious words, the police officer also looked at him seriously. "Today, oh no, yesterday, I went to the Jisan Psychiatric Hospital on the mountain. A few days ago, because the signal tower was blown down, the prisoners and patients there have rebelled. They killed all the guards, doctors, and nurses and disguised themselves as these people. At the same time, they killed the guards, doctors, and nurses. And these days, they have been eating these people. It was not easy for me to escape. Here is the evidence. Hurry up and call your boss." Looking at the policeman in front of him, Jiang Hai said with a serious face. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, the police officer here was completely stunned. The news of lunatics attacking the mental hospital and eating people made him a little overwhelmed. It wasn't until Jiang Hai looked at him in a daze and knocked on the table in front of him that he finally reacted. Then he immediately picked up the phone and called the police chief of this town. The police chief, who was still asleep, was also shocked after hearing this news. He immediately called the state police. This is really big news. After Jiang Hai called the police, he went to the police station to sit and wait for the officials to arrive. In less than half an hour, all the police in the town were in place, and then 20 people went to seal the mountain. Then more than an hour later, the police in the city arrived. This time there were more than 100 people, and there was also an armed police force. Well, Jiang Hai didn't know what the American armed police were called, but the armed police in his home with a maritime patrol team. After watching the video provided by Jiang Hai, the head of the armed police was also very surprised. Such an ugly thing naturally had to be covered up as soon as possible. So he also told Jiang Hai, hoping that he wouldn't easily reveal it to the media. But he also understood that such a big thing couldn't be covered up purely by covering it up. He could only hope that this matter would be solved within the police force. Jiang Hai didn't care about this. Anyway, he didn't expect the exposure bonus to make money. Then, more than 100 heavily armed police attacked the mental hospital at 10 o'clock in the morning. After entering, they really saw everything that Jiang Hai said. At that time, almost all the police vomited, and the mental patients were quite obedient. A small number of them resisted, but in the face of these heavily armed police, their resistance was meaningless. Soon, the mental hospital was captured, and in the basement, they also found the mastermind, Doflamingo Campbell. The whole operation only went on for about 10 minutes, and the mental hospital was wiped out. But even so, it still alarmed the media. After the police finished the battle, when they went down the mountain, they found that the media had unknowingly surrounded the mountain. Seeing that the situation was not good, Jiang Hai, who came as a guide, disappeared into the crowd immediately, then got into his car and returned home with Louisa Knightley. He knew that he was breaking the law by taking Louisa Knightley away, but he had to do it, because if he let her stay here, she might be beaten or something. And most importantly, if she went to a normal mental hospital, if Jiang Hai wanted to overturn her case, the rich man could kill her first. At that time, it would be useless even if Jiang Hai wanted to overturn the case for a dead person. Therefore, Jiang Hai still took Louisa Knightley away. Of course, he didn't take her away directly. When he left, he also called Moses Adams. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, Moses Adams said that he would fly to Los Angeles immediately. At the same time, he also pulled a line for Jiang Hai. After this incident, Jiang Hai would donate $1 million to the California Police Department. Of course, a donation was a donation, and now, Jiang Hai was protecting the witness. Of course, this matter was also notified to the bureau chief of the city. Otherwise, it would be difficult for them if they found that one person was missing when they counted. After everything was settled, Jiang Hai returned to Los Angeles. Louisa Knightley kept looking outside along the way. To be honest, she hadn't felt this kind of freedom for a long time. She was quite reluctant to leave everything outside. Looking at her, Jiang Hai also smiled. This world was indeed full of darkness. But this had nothing to do with Jiang Hai, but he could save a life. Jiang Hai also felt that he had done a good thing. Of course, Jiang Hai's good deed had nothing to do with her helping Jiang Hai that night. Jiang Hai was a gentleman. Yes, that was what he thought. He felt that he was quite noble and full of positive energy. Look at how saintly he was. He even saved a lunatic. This kind of great love was quite impressive. Driving, Jiang Hai soon returned to Beverly Hills in Los Angeles. After waiting there for a long time, Moses Adams came. After he came, he officially took over Louisa Knightley's case, and Jiang Hai and the others were also preparing to enter the mountain tomorrow. However, before leaving, Moses Adams pulled Jiang Hai to the side. "Boss, when did you come to Los Angeles?" Looking at Jiang Hai, Moses Adams asked with some doubts. To be honest, he didn't know when Jiang Hai came to Los Angeles. "Why did he come here?" "I've been here for a few days." "Why? Is there any trouble with Louisa Knightley's case?" Looking at Moses Adams, Jiang Hai asked with some doubts. If the problem could be solved with money, it didn't matter, but if it couldn't be solved with money, it would be troublesome. "No, this case is full of doubts, and I've also checked our opponent. He's just a small nouveau riche. He has some connections with the California consortium, but he's just a pawn. No one will go against a billionaire like you. I'm asking you this to ask, since you came to Los Angeles, didn't you go to Google to get your shares certified?" Looking at Jiang Hai, Moses Adams waved his hand. Jiang Hai was the superior. He just needed to tell them what to do, and then Moses Adams and the others would solve the problem for Jiang Hai. They also had to find out who Jiang Hai's opponent was. The person who framed Louisa Knightley was a giant in the eyes of ordinary people. His total assets were about $200 to $300 million, and he had some connections with the California Consortium, one of the top 10 consortia in the United States. If an ordinary person provoked him, he would naturally die without a burial place, but Jiang Hai, haha, it was called crushing. So in Moses Adams' view, he could win Louisa Knightley's case without spending $500,000. He was so confident because his connections at this time were no longer comparable to a guy with only $1 or $200 million, even if this was the opponent's home ground. Moreover, Jiang Hai was never a person who would let the horse run and not let the horse eat grass. For this case, he had spent $1 million to ensure that Louisa Knightley would not be caught. Now, the money he gave Moses Adams was $2 million. That was to say, if it was settled within $2 million, the rest would be his. How much could be saved was up to Moses Adams' ability. What Moses Adams cared about was Jiang Hai's social status. Certified equity? Hearing Moses Adams' words, Jiang Hai touched his chin. This was also a problem. Wait for me to come back. My matters here are more urgent. After thinking for a while, Jiang Hai said to Moses Adams. His matters here were indeed more urgent. After he finished visiting the Native American territory, he would go to Silicon Valley for certification when he came back. At that time, Moses Adams would probably be almost done with Louisa Knightley's matter. Of course, it was not as easy to fight a company as one imagined, but it was not so difficult with money to pave the way. Chapter 891. The following is a piece of news. Yesterday, a source said that a horrifying incident happened in California's largest psychiatric welfare center, Jahan Psychiatric Hospital. Yeah, Tony, after I heard about this incident, I didn't dare to close my eyes at night. Oh my God, it's really a tragedy. Millie, I think so too. It said that on the night of XX, the signal tower of Jahan Mental Hospital was blown down by the wind. Then, the patients in the mental hospital started what they called an uprising. The top criminal is called Doflamingo Campbell. He used his knowledge of chemistry to easily concoct a powerful tranquilizer and carried out the crime in the hospital. When the police received the news, all the guards, doctors, and nurses in the hospital were killed. However, after the patients took over the hospital, they didn't leave. Instead, they pretended to be guards, doctors, and nurses. When the police attacked Jahan, they were still acting. Maybe in their eyes, they were the guards and medical staff here. Below are some images from the scene. Looking at a certain image flashing by on the TV, a young man with a target on his face grabbed the gun next to him and fired wildly. The sound of gunshots lasted for 15 times before disappearing, but the young man still kept pulling the trigger. Looking at the young man's appearance, the others in the room laughed, because this is not the first time the young man went crazy. In fact, this news had already been broadcasted yesterday. Today, it was just a rebroadcast. Unfortunately, another television was broken. However, to them, the television wasn't that important. Okay, calm down. You will have a chance to take revenge. At this time, a man wearing a cowboy hat walked gently to his side, patted him on the shoulder, then said to him with a smile, "Do I really have a chance?" Hearing this man's words, the young man sat back on the sofa decadently and said with a bitter smile. Hearing his words, the man wearing a cowboy hat smiled and patted him on the head. If you believe that you can take revenge, then even if the chance is small, you still have a chance. If you don't believe that you can take revenge, then even if he is standing in front of you, you have no chance. Hearing the cowboy hat's words, the young man took a deep breath and nodded seriously. His fighting spirit returned to him. I've received news that Jiang Hai and the others have already left Beverly Hills. They're heading toward Nevada, but their destination is a little off. I don't know if they're going to Yosemite National Park or Death Valley National Park. At this moment, a man who had been sitting in the corner stood up and said with a serious face, "Look, isn't the opportunity here now?" Hearing the man's words, the man in the cowboy hat chuckled. His face flashed with a vicious expression. Everyone here had a grudge against Jiang Hai, including himself. Get ready. We're leaving in 5 minutes. After looking at the time, the man in the cowboy hat said seriously, then left the room first. The other people in the room also checked their equipment, guns, and ammunition at this time. 5 minutes later, 4 off-road vehicles drove out of this slum and sped in the direction where Jiang Hai and the others left. At this time, Jiang Hai didn't notice that in the sky not far behind him, a drone was flying there. If he knew, he would probably regret not bringing Chirpy. With Chirpy, the king of the sky, even a hairless drone would not be its opponent. But at this time, Jiang Hai didn't know this. He just sat in the car, listening to music while driving. Sitting next to him was Qi Jia, while little Huang and Xiao Bai were sitting in the back seat, looking at the scenery outside. From time to time, they stretched their heads out of the window and blew their tongues and mouths with the wind, blowing out a lot of saliva. In the middle of them, Wallace Shelley was holding a military GPS positioning system, studying the specific location. About 10 meters behind him, there was a car similar to Jiang Hai's car. Sitting in it were Azalina, Alfred Sala, Valentina Berlikia, Beliak, and Raylis Carter. The 5 women were also fully armed as they sat there, chewing gum, driving a car, or studying some gadgets. But don't underestimate these gadgets. In their hands, these gadgets could be used to kill people. Boss, the location has basically been determined. We have to pass through Yosemite National Park and enter the border between California and Nevada. There's a Gobi there, behind is the Sierra Nevada forest, and ahead is the Nevada desert. I have to admit that we are lucky. Sitting in the car, Wallace Shelley looked at the GPS and said to Jiang Hai with a smile. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also chuckled. Those Americans are really too much. How can there be gold in that place, where even birds don't shit? Hearing Wallace Shelley's words, Qi Jia also said with a face full of dissatisfaction. In her opinion, it's impossible for that place to have gold. Hey, don't say that. Although that place is not particularly rich in gold, the amount of gold produced is not small, but the output is a bit low, otherwise it wouldn't be abandoned now. Hearing Qi Jia's words, Wallace Shelley also said with a smile, that area did produce gold in the past. But now everyone knows that the golden dream of California was actually deliberately promoted by the authorities. They wanted to develop the Western region, but it's impossible to develop the Western region just by relying on enthusiasm and so on. The development of the Western region is beneficial to the country and the people, but the people should say, what the F***CK is this? Well, they will be criticized for not having positive energy again. But this was the truth. People nowadays were so snobbish and greedy. They could work, endure hardships, and be tired, but they had to get a certain return. In the country, land belonged to the country. Maybe you planted trees here for decades, and it was not easy for the trees to grow. Then, the country took back the land. Who would you cry to when that happened? As for the development of the Western region in the United States, although the land in the United States basically belongs to whoever opened it, the Central and Eastern regions also had the same rule. Why would people go to the Western region to develop? It's not worth it at all. Therefore, the American government began to spread the word that those who discovered gold mines and oil fields in the West had become rich overnight. Oil in Texas and gold in California. These 2 states developed in this way. But now you see, Texas is indeed still relying on oil, but mainly on animal husbandry, and California is relying on tourism. But you have to admit that the American government's policy was right. Moreover, they were not fooling these people. These people came to mine, and many of them found gold. This is not fake. It's just a matter of how much gold there is. The amount of gold stored in California may be ordinary for a country, but for an individual, it's definitely a huge amount of wealth. It's not like no one has ever mined gold before, so it's mainly dependent on one's own fate. It's similar to winning the lottery. Jiang Hai and the others drove quickly on the highway. At noon, they arrived in front of Yosemite National Park. Logically speaking, entering the park naturally requires a car search, but Jiang Hai specially made a note to avoid a car search. To be honest, Yosemite National Park is really small, only 1,100 square kilometers, and there are very few things in the park. Compared to the distant Death Valley, there is nothing here except for some green plants. The only thing worth seeing here is the subtropical coniferous forest. In Death Valley, other than a bare area, there are also saline alkali lands, sand dunes, volcanic craters, canyons, snowy mountains, and so on. So even in the tourist brochures, the recommended time to visit here is only 1 day, but Death Valley has 4 days. What kind of place is this in the eyes of the lazy Americans? This is a place to have a picnic. As for going to Nevada or the Sierra Nevada, don't be ridiculous. For Americans, there's nothing fun there. The Gobi Desert is really like what Chi Jie said, a place where even birds don't shit. Describing it as a barren place is a bit unfair. In the Gobi Desert in the northwest of the country, there are some buildings piled up with stones from time to time, but there is nothing here. After confirming the note, Jiang Hai and the others were able to enter the park without a car search. Then, they also took a break at the entrance of the park and bought some food. Of course, there's also a lot of food in their backpacks. Compressed biscuits, beef jerky, sausages, self-heating spaghetti, and so on, but those things are to be eaten after entering the mountain. Jiang Hai doesn't want to eat these now. After buying a bunch of hamburgers, hot dogs, corn cakes, and pizza at the entrance, Jiang Hai and the others rushed towards the interior of John Mitty National Park. On the other side, the people who have been using drones to determine Jiang Hai's itinerary also arrived in front of the park after an hour, but they don't have a note to enter, so they can only take a detour from a distance. If Jiang Hai's goal is in the park, then they are blind this time. However, it was a pity that Jiang Hai's goal was the Sierra Nevada. Therefore, even if these people circled around, they would still be able to find Jiang Hai's group. Naturally, Jiang Hai's group didn't know about this at this time. They were still heading towards the forest. Chapter 892. Follow us all the way. If you find anything, remember to come back and tell us. Jiang Hai patted Little Huang and Xiao Bai on the head and said to them seriously. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the 2 dogs also stuck out their tongues, then lowered their heads and rushed into the forest. Seeing that the 2 dogs had disappeared, Jiang Hai and others also sat back in the car and studied their next route. To be honest, for Jiang Hai, looking at the map here, he was really a little confused. Where do we go next? Chi Jie picked up a hamburger and asked Jiang Hai while eating. I'm not very sure, but it should be the right way to go. Hearing Chi Jie's words, Wallace Shelley, who was sitting in the back and in charge of these things, also said with some uncertainty. Almost half a day has passed since they entered Yosemite National Corporation. A few hours ago, they had passed through Yosemite National Park and entered the Sierra Nevada. After crossing the Merced River, there wasn't much of a river in front of them. Let's drive slowly. We will find it eventually. If we can't find it, we will stay for the night. Anyway, we didn't plan to find it so easily. Jiang Hai listened to Wallace Shelley's uncertain words, but he didn't care. He just chuckled and said. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the others here also expressed their agreement. After talking to each other through the walkie-talkie, Jiang Hai and others also restarted the engine and drove along the rugged mountain road toward the Sierra Nevada. The road here was really bad. Oh, sorry. Jiang Hai was wrong. There was no road here at all. Although the Mercedes-Benz AMG 65 was also a pretty good off-road vehicle, compared with the Shield, it was really a lot worse. So when Jiang Hai drove the car, it was still quite shaky. They kept driving through the forest all the way. The speed was definitely not fast enough. At this speed, they were not worried about losing Little Huang and Xiao Bai. Finally, before night fell, Jiang Hai and the others left the forest area. However, the situation behind them was not too good either, because there were no trees in front of them. The Sierra Nevada was part of the western edge of the Cordillera Mountains in North America. Its main boundary was naturally in Nevada, but its western boundary was in California. It stretched 640 kilometers from north to south, and its highest peak, Mount Whitney, was 4,418 meters high. It was the tallest mountain in the United States. The eastern slope was steep, dry, and devoid of forests. The western slope was densely forested, and there were modern glaciers at the peak. The natural scenery was very good. What made this place famous all over the world was its hydraulic resources and gold mines. Jiang Hai and the others were now heading to the east. After leaving the forest, Jiang Hai and the others discovered that the further they walked, the more desolate it became. This wasn't an adjective, but a descriptive one. At this time, it was as if they were walking in the middle of a desert. There were very few grasses on the ground, and some mountains could be seen in the distance. There were also some faults in the surrounding rocks, showing the ancient traces of this place. Don't be surprised if you find some fossils here, because there were really a lot of fossils here, especially in the wild. As everyone knew, North America was the distribution center of dinosaur fossils. Of course, they were found all over the world. In the beginning, all the continents on Earth were merged into one, called Panga Continent. As time went by, the continents slowly moved and became the present world. Of course, dinosaurs were found everywhere. But compared to densely populated areas like Europe and Asia, where dinosaur fossils were more or less destroyed in ancient times, North America maintained its original lush environment, and the fossilized areas were well preserved. At the same time, for some dinosaur fans, North America, whether it was South America or North America, was a paradise for dinosaur fossils, because the largest dinosaurs in the world lived in North America. For example, the familiar Tyrannosaurus rex lived in North America. The largest Seismosaurus lived in South America, including the Australopithecus and Carcharodontosaurus, whose complete bones were not found, lived in North America. The largest carnivorous dinosaur in Asia was the Tyrannosaurus rex, a medium-sized dinosaur. Jiang Hai also liked dinosaurs a long time ago, but that was when he was very young. Now, looking at the barren land in front of him, Jiang Hai didn't have any interest. Perhaps it was because there were too many stones here. Jiang Hai had seen that the water resources here were quite good. There were a lot of rivers, and there were fish in the rivers. There were also water plants in the rivers, but there was no grass on the land. He had to admit that it was very strange. It even reminded Jiang Hai of the Hell Gate he went to in the past. That place was also as desolate as this place, but it was even more desolate. There weren't even any mountains there. Here, there were some mountains and some scenery. However, other than the mountains, there really weren't many animal resources here. It was understandable. After all, there were too many humans living in this area. It was better in California, which was on the western slope. There were still herds of animals, and it was better in the south. The place where Jiang Hai and the others came from was a little panicked. Before coming, Jiang Hai had checked the animal situation here. Black bears are the most numerous species, but they basically lived on the west side. Stone goats were the second most common species, but they basically lived on the south side. Mountain lions were rarely seen, and grizzly bears lived alone. No one knew when they would be able to see them. The bird resources were quite rich, but they were basically on the west slope. Jiang Hai didn't see other American badgers, Canadian ferrets, red cats, mountain beavers, flying squirrels, fishing martens, wolverines, and so on. The only thing he saw were some birds flying in the sky from time to time, but Jiang Hai wasn't interested in these birds. As the sun gradually set, Jiang Hai and the others weren't in a hurry to travel. Instead, they found an open space. This open space wasn't far from the water. 2 cars surrounded the open space, and then Jiang Hai and the others lit a fire here and prepared to rest. Of course, they couldn't sleep outside. There were 2 cars. 1 could lie in the back row, and 2 could lie in the front row. In total, they could sleep 6 people. Jiang Hai and the others had a total of 8 people, and 2 people were on night watch. It was quite good. After setting up the fire, not long after, little Huang and Xiao Bai came over with 2 rabbits in their mouths. Jiang Hai picked up the fishing rod he prepared and caught 2 fish. Maybe it was because the fish here lived too comfortably, or maybe they had never seen humans in their lives, so they weren't very vigilant. Jiang Hai dug up a few worms and hung them on the hook. Not long after, he caught 2 fish. The fish here were also quite famous. This place was rich in trout. Because this place didn't belong to the Great Lakes, and no one farmed here, the number of fish was quite good. Moreover, there were no Asian carps here, and they were all native fish in the United States. Jiang Hai also caught such fish. In addition to the 2 river trout, there was also a rainbow trout. Naturally, these 3 fish and 2 rabbits entered the stomachs of Jiang Hai and the others. Looking at these fish, Jiang Hai couldn't help but think of the Yangtze River grenadier fish, the large yellow croaker, and the Chinese bahaba fish that he raised. It would take some time for the Chinese bahaba fish to become a group, but the Yangtze River grenadier fish and the large yellow croaker fish grew quite fast. With the nourishment of Jiang Hai's spiritual energy, these fish could live for 3 years at most. He estimated that he could harvest a batch of them next year. While thinking about the manner, Jiang Hai and the others also chatted casually. Then they got into the car, leaving Jiang Hai and Layla Scarter to keep watch. Later in the night, Aller, Sarah, and Valentina would keep watch. In such a place, keeping watch at night was indispensable. As for tomorrow, they would just let them sleep a little longer. As everyone got into the car to sleep, Jiang Hai and Layla Scarter also chatted. This was the first time Jiang Hai and Layla Scarter talked alone, but it was nothing more than asking her if she lived well there and if she adapted to the current life. After all, something indescribable had happened between the two of them. So if they wanted to communicate, it wouldn't be awkward, and it wouldn't seem like they were trying to find something to talk about. Of course, in this cold wilderness, the two didn't do anything like using the sky as a blanket and the ground as a bed. Jiang Hai wasn't in a hurry, but they got together to warm themselves by the fire, chatting, and looking at the stars in the sky. Perhaps this was an unforgettable night for Layla Scarter. While they were chatting there, a drone was parked on a mountain in the distance. Through the drone's image, the group of people still hiding in the forest at this time also locked onto Jiang Hai's position. Relax. Relax, he's right there. He can't run away. If you go out now, you might not be able to kill him. After all, this is an open space, and his car seems to be better than ours. When he finds the location, not only can we block him inside and kill him, we can even make a fortune. You can go back and revive your father's casino, and you can also take revenge. Seeing Jiang Hai on the screen, the young man sitting in the front passenger seat clenched his hand unconsciously, but at this moment, someone patted him on the shoulder. He looked back and found that it was the man wearing the cowboy hat. He looked at the young man and said with a smile. Hearing what he said, the young man was relieved. He knew that the cowboy hat was right. Now is not the time for revenge. Not only did they want to kill Jiang Hai, but they also wanted to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. They lay in the car for a night. They were trackers, so they didn't dare to turn on the headlights or the ignition. They just stayed in the car for a night. The next day, after Jiang Hai and the others got back on the road, they dared to start the engine and follow Jiang Hai from afar. They must not appear in Jiang Hai's sight. They were professionals in doing these things. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.